Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you used this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The Fall of the Roman Republic, a symphony of ruin. Listen closely. Can you hear it? Beneath the tramp of legionary sandals on stone, beneath the roar of the crowd in the Colosseum, though that comes later, a monument built on the Republic's grave, beneath the fervent pronouncements of senators in their pristine togas, there's another sound. It's a grinding, a splintering, the sound of foundations cracking under unbearable weight. This isn't a story of a sudden cataclysmic collapse, like a temple struck by lightning. No. The death of the Roman Republic was a slow, agonizing bleed, a terminal illness that festered for a century, its symptoms misdiagnosed, its remedies often more poisonous than the disease. Forget your sanitized histories, your marble busts of noble statesmen. We're going to wade through the muck and the mire, the blood and the backstabbing, the naked, grasping ambition that choked the life out of an idea. The idea of *res publica*, the public thing. A state supposedly governed by its citizens for its citizens. We'll see how that noble aspiration was twisted, perverted, and ultimately strangled by men. And a few remarkable women pulling strings from the shadows, who craved power more than they cherished Rome itself. Or perhaps they loved a Rome remade in their own image, a Rome that served their interests, their glory. This is a tale of how a system designed to prevent the rise of kings ironically paved the way for emperors. It's about the corrosive power of wealth, the destabilizing force of endless war, and the deadly allure of the demagogue. It's about how a society that prided itself on its traditions, its most maiorum the way of the ancestors, systematically dismantled those very traditions in a desperate, often violent, scramble for dominance. Our journey will be long, stretching from the first tremors of serious discontent, the idealistic, doomed reforms of the Gracchi brothers, to the earth-shattering moment Julius Caesar, a man who embodied both the brilliance and the hubris of his age, crossed a provincial stream called the Rubicon and plunged the known world into civil war. We will witness the rise of military strongmen, men who turned the Republic's legions, once its protectors, into private armies loyal only to their paymasters and their charismatic generals. We'll navigate the treacherous waters of political alliances, the cynical bargains struck in lamplit villas, the betrayals whispered in the Senate House, and we will stand, as it were, on the blood-soaked fields of Pharsalus, Thapsus, and Munda, smelling the iron tang of slaughter as Romans killed Romans on an unprecedented scale. Finally, we will arrive at the bitter end, the assassination of a dictator who styled himself a man of the people, the ensuing power vacuum, and the final brutal convulsions that saw the birth of the Roman Empire under Augustus. The Republic would be a ghost then, a haunting memory invoked by emperors who paid lip service to its ideals while wielding absolute power. So, prepare yourself. This isn't just history, it's a vivisection of a dying state, a portrait of an age of unparalleled upheaval. We'll explore the gritty realities, the uncomfortable truths, and the complex motivations of the men who tore their world apart to build a new one. The names are legendary: Marius, Sulla, Pompey, Crassus, Cicero, Cato, Caesar, Antony, Octavian. But behind the legends are flawed, fascinating human beings, driven by ambition, fear, greed, and, sometimes, even a twisted sense of duty. Their story is a timeless warning. The echoes of their struggles, their triumphs, and their failures resonate even now in the halls of power and the streets of our own modern republics. The air in Rome is thick with the scent of incense from the temples, the sweat of the masses in the forum, the metallic tang of freshly minted denarii, and something else, the faint, unmistakable aroma of decay. Let us begin. Book I, Seeds of Dissent, the Gracchi and the Cracks in the Foundation. Introduction to Book I. Before the warlords, before the civil wars that painted the Mediterranean crimson, before Caesar became a name synonymous with absolute power, there were the Gracchi. Two brothers, shins of Roman nobility, yet touched by a dangerous idealism. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus didn't seek to overthrow the Republic. They sought to save it, to heal its festering wounds. But in doing so, they picked at scabs the powerful wish to ignore, and in return, they unleashed a torrent of violence that would stain Roman politics for a century. Their story is the overture to our opera of destruction, the first, jarring notes that signaled the old harmonies were breaking down. They lit a fire, intending to illuminate a path to reform. Instead, that fire would eventually consume the Republic itself. We begin in a Rome still mighty, still outwardly confident, but inwardly, a sickness was taking hold, a disease born of inequality and avarice. Chapter 1. The Elder Brother's Burden, Tiberius Gracchus and the Land ***. The year is 133 BCE, Rome. Imagine it. Not the gleaming imperial city of Augustus, not yet. This Rome is a sprawling, chaotic metropolis, a city of jarring contrasts. Marble temples dedicated to Jupiter Optimus Maximus and Juma Regina rise majestically on the Capitoline Hill, their gilded roofs catching the Italian sun. Down below, in the Stabaro Valley, narrow, winding streets teem with life. Vendors hawking their wares, craftsmen hammering in open-fronted workshops, children darting through the crowds, and the ever-present stench of humanity, animal dung, and cooking fires. The Forum Romanum, the heart of the Republic, is a cacophony of voices, merchants haggling, orators declaiming from the rostra, priests performing ancient rites, and citizens simply gossiping, arguing, living their lives under the shadow of the Senate House, the Curia. But look closer. See the cracks in the facade. While victorious legions expand Roman dominion across the Mediterranean, bringing unprecedented wealth, slaves, plunder, tribute, back to the capital, this wealth isn't shared equally. It flows upwards into the coffers of the senatorial elite, the old patrician families, and the newly enriched plebeian nobles who have bought their way into power. They use this wealth to acquire vast agricultural estates, the latifundia worked by armies of slaves captured in Rome's endless wars. And what of the men who fought those wars? The small citizen farmers, the backbone of the Roman army for centuries. They returned from years of campaigning in Spain, in Greece, in Africa, to find their ancestral plots neglected, bankrupt, or simply swallowed by their wealthier neighbors. They drift to the city, landless and resentful, swelling the ranks of the urban poor, the proletari men who have nothing to offer the state but their children, proles. They become dependent on the state's occasional grain doles and the increasingly lavish public games offered by ambitious politicians seeking their votes. Their anger is a low, simmering heat beneath the surface of Roman life. Into this simmering discontent steps Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus. He's no wild-eyed revolutionary from the gutter. Far from it. His lineage is impeccable. His father, a distinguished statesman and general. His mother, Cornelia, daughter of Scipio Africanus, the conqueror of Hannibal, a woman so revered, she would famously declare her sons to be her jewels. Tiberius himself is well-educated, eloquent, and possessed of a keen sense of justice, perhaps sharpened by his experiences serving as a quaestor in Spain, where he witnessed firsthand the decline of the Italian peasantry and the rapaciousness of Roman officials. He looks at Rome, at Italy, and sees a problem that, to him, is not just economic but existential. The traditional Roman soldier was a landowner, a stakeholder in the Republic. An army of dispossessed, landless men. That's a dangerous prospect. How can they be loyal to a state that has abandoned them? How can Rome maintain its military might if its pool of citizen soldiers dries up? The wild beasts that roam Italy have their lairs and dens. Tiberius is said to have declaimed, his voice ringing with passion, perhaps in a private gathering, perhaps already testing the waters of public opinion. But the men who fight and die for Italy have nothing but the air and the light. They wander from place to place with their wives and children, homeless and destitute. The generals tell them to fight for the tombs of their ancestors and the shrines of their gods, but they lie. For not one of these many Romans has an ancestral altar or a family tomb. They fight and die to maintain the luxury and wealth of others. They are called masters of the world, but they do not possess a single clod of earth they can call their own. Whether he uttered these exact words or not, they capture the essence of his burning conviction. And so, in 133 BCE, Tiberius Gracchus, having been elected as one of the 10 tribunes of the plebs, an office originally created to protect the common people from the abuses of the patrician magistrates, proposes a radical solution: the Lex Sempronia Agraria *, a land reform law. It wasn't entirely new. There had been laws limiting the amount of public land, *ager publicus *, any one individual could hold before. But these laws had been largely ignored, conveniently forgotten by the wealthy elite who profited from their flouting. Tiberius proposed to reinvigorate these old statutes, to reclaim public land held illegally or in excess by the rich, and redistribute it in small plots to landless Roman citizens. Compensation of a sort would be offered for improvements made to the land, but fundamentally it was a seizure and redistribution. To Tiberius and his supporters, a motley coalition of idealistic nobles, concerned moderates, and the desperate urban poor, this was a matter of survival for the Republic. It would restore the peasantry, strengthen the army, and alleviate social unrest. Simple, right? Wrong. To the senatorial elite, the optimates the best men, as they styled themselves, Tiberius's proposal was an outrage, an assault on property rights, a dangerous appeal to mob rule, and a direct threat to their wealth and influence. Many of them held vast tracts of this public land, considering it practically their own private property after generations of use. They saw Tiberius not as a reformer, but as a demagogue, stirring up the masses for his own ambition. Was he trying to make himself a king? The accusation, however baseless, was a potent one in a republic founded on the overthrow of monarchy. The battle lines were drawn. The Senate, traditionally the guiding hand of Roman policy, found itself confronted by a tribune who was determined to use the full powers of his office, including the right to propose legislation directly to the plebeian assembly, concilium plebis *, bypassing senatorial approval if necessary. The air in the forum wasn't just thick with the usual Roman smells of dust, sweat, and sacrificial animals. It was thick with something new, something sharp and unsettling: the metallic tang of impending violence. Tiberius had thrown down the gauntlet. The question was, how far would the Senate go to stop him? And how far would Tiberius go to see his vision realized? The answer would set a bloody precedent, a pattern of political violence that would echo down the decades, growing louder and more destructive with each iteration. The Republic was about to take its first significant stumble on a long road to ruin. *** Chapter 2: The Veto and the Unthinkable Escalation ***. Imagine the scene: the plebeian assembly, a swirling mass of citizens gathered in the open air, perhaps in the forum itself, or on the Capitoline Hill. The sun beats down. Hawkers weave through the crowd selling watered wine and snacks. The noise is immense, a constant babble of anticipation, anger, hope, and fear. On a raised platform stands Tiberius Gracchus, his voice amplified by conviction, trying to sway the crowd, to make them understand the urgency of his law. He's not just speaking to them, he's speaking for them, articulating their grievances, their aspirations. But the Senate is not powerless. They have their own weapon, a tool embedded within the very office Tiberius holds, another tribune. The tribuneship was designed with internal checks. Any one of the 10 tribunes could veto the actions of another. The optimates, the entrenched senatorial conservatives, knew this. They'd found their man, Marcus Octavius, another tribune of the plebs. Octavius wasn't necessarily a villain in this piece, not in his own eyes. He might have genuinely believed Tiberius was a dangerous radical, a threat to Roman stability and the sacred rights of property. He might have been a close friend or political ally of those whose land was threatened. Or perhaps he was simply ambitious, seeing an opportunity to curry favor with the powerful senatorial faction. Whatever his motives, when Tiberius brought his agrarian law before the assembly for a vote, Octavius stood forth. Veto. The word, meaning "I forbid," sliced through the expectant murmur of the crowd. A stunned silence, then uproar. Tiberius was thwarted. By tradition, a tribune's veto was sacrosanct, an absolute block. He pleaded with Octavius, publicly, passionately. He reminded him of their shared duty to the plebs, perhaps even of past friendships. He offered to compensate Octavius from his own private fortune if Octavius stood to lose land under the new law. Octavius, whether from conviction, pressure, or stubbornness, refused to budge. This is where things take a radical, unprecedented turn. Tiberius Gracchus, frustrated and convinced of the righteousness and absolute necessity of his cause, did something unthinkable. He argued that a tribune who acted against the interests of the people he was elected to protect had forfeited his office. He put a motion to the plebeian assembly, depose Marcus Octavius. This was revolutionary. No tribune had ever been forcibly removed from office by a vote of the assembly. It shattered precedent, violated the perceived sacrosanctity of a magistrate's term. The implications were enormous. If the assembly could simply vote out a tribune whose actions it disliked, what did that mean for the rule of law, for the established constitutional order? It was a step into uncharted, dangerous territory. The tribes were called to vote, one by one. The tension must have been unbearable. As the first tribes voted in favor of deposing Octavius, Tiberius paused the proceedings, making one last, desperate appeal to his colleague. He reportedly embraced Octavius, begged him with tears in his eyes to relent, to step aside. Octavius remained unmoved, perhaps terrified, perhaps resolute. The voting resumed. The verdict was clear. Marcus Octavius was stripped of his tribuneship. He was dragged, some say, from the tribune's bench by Tiberius's attendants. The Rubicon, metaphorically speaking, had been crossed. Not by Caesar yet, but by Tiberius Gracchus. He had, in the eyes of his opponents, used the force of the mob to override a sacred constitutional principle. His land law, the asterisk lex sempronia agraria asterisk, was then passed by the jubilant assembly. A three-man commission. Tiberius himself, his younger brother Gaius Gracchus, not yet a major player, but watching, learning, and his father-in-law Appius Claudius Pulcher was appointed to oversee the complex and contentious process of reclaiming and redistributing the land. The optimates in the Senate were aghast. This was tyranny, pure and simple, cloaked in the language of popular reform. Tiberius hadn't just challenged their economic interests, he had assaulted the very foundations of senatorial authority and traditional Roman governance. They saw him not as a savior of the Republic, but as its potential destroyer, a man who would stop at nothing to achieve his aims, even if it meant tearing down the established order. Tiberius, for his part, likely felt he had no choice. The system was rigged against the people, and desperate times called for desperate measures. He was fighting for the soul of Rome, and if tradition stood in the way of justice and survival, then tradition would have to yield. But the victory was precarious. The Land Commission faced immense practical difficulties, identifying which lands were truly public, dealing with disputed claims, and facing the sullen, often violent, resistance of wealthy landowners. The Senate, meanwhile, did everything in its power to obstruct and undermine Tiberius. They allocated a laughably meager budget for the commission's work. They spread rumors, painted him as an aspiring king. The famous story circulated that when a delegation from Pergamum arrived, bequeathing their kingdom and its treasures to Rome upon the death of their king, Attalus II, Tiberius immediately proposed using that wealth to fund his land reforms. To his enemies, this was further proof of his autocratic ambition, meddling in foreign policy, a traditional senatorial preserve, and high-handedly redirecting state resources. As Tiberius's year as tribune neared its end, he faced a terrifying prospect. Once out of office, he would lose his sacrosanctity, the legal inviolability that protected tribunes from physical attack or prosecution. His enemies, powerful and enraged, would surely seek revenge. He knew he was a marked man. And so, Tiberius Gracchus made another fateful, controversial decision. He announced he would stand for re-election as tribune for a second consecutive year. This too was highly irregular, if not strictly illegal. Roman tradition valued rotation in office, fearing any one man accumulating too much power for too long. His opponents seized on this as definitive proof of his monarchical ambitions. He wasn't just a reformer anymore. He was a tyrant in the making, subverting the Republic's most cherished principles. The stage was set for a final bloody confrontation. The election day for the tribuneship of 132 BCE dawned hot and tense. The city was a powder keg. Tiberius's supporters, many of them rural folk who had flocked to Rome to support their champion, gathered on the Capitoline Hill, where the voting was to take place. His opponents, senators and their clients, were also out in force, determined to prevent his re-election by any means necessary. The air crackled with animosity. Whispers of plots and counterplots flew through the crowd. Violence felt not just possible, but inevitable. The grinding sound of the Republic's foundations was growing louder. Chapter 3. The First Blood. A tribune slain The Capitoline Hill, one of Rome's sacred hearts, home to the magnificent temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the very symbol of Roman power and divine favor. On this sweltering election day in 132 BCE, it was to become a killing ground. Not a battlefield against foreign enemies, but an abattoir for Roman citizens by Roman citizens. Tiberius Gracchus arrived, surrounded by a throng of anxious supporters. He knew the danger. He had reportedly been warned of plots against his life. Some say he even gestured to his head, a signal to his followers that his life was in peril. A gesture his enemies would later twist into a demand for a crown. The truth, as always in these febrile times, became a weapon in itself. The voting began, or perhaps it struggled to begin, amidst scenes of chaos and intimidation. Scuffles broke out. Shouts and accusations flew like stones. News, or perhaps deliberately manufactured rumors, reached the Senate, convened nearby, possibly in the Temple of Fides. The message, relayed with panic-stricken urgency, Tiberius Gracchus was inciting the crowd to violence. He was calling for a diadem. He was about to make himself king. It's hard to say now what truly happened in the swirling confusion of the crowd. Did Tiberius overstep? Did his supporters become unruly? Or was this a pre-planned provocation, a pretext for the Senate to act? What we do know is how the Senate, or at least a hardline faction within it, reacted. The presiding consul, Publius Mucius Scaevola, was a respected jurist, a man of law. He was urged by the more extreme senators to declare Tiberius a public enemy and use force to restore order. Scaevola, to his credit, refused. He would not, he said, be the first to use violence, nor would he put any citizen to death without a proper trial. A flicker, perhaps, of the old Republican restraint, a respect for due process. But it was a flicker about to be snuffed out. Then a figure of immense authority and fury stepped forward, Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica Serapio. He was not only a powerful senator and a former consul, but also the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome. And critically, he was Tiberius Gracchus' cousin. Family ties, in this instance, meant less than political enmity and the perceived threat to the established order. Since the consul betrays the Republic, Nasica reportedly thundered, his voice cutting through the senatorial debate, "Let those who wish to save the laws follow me." He pulled the hem of his toga over his head, a traditional gesture for a priest about to perform a sacrifice, or, in this context, a chilling signal for righteous violence. A mob of senators, their attendants, and their clients, armed with improvised weapons, broken pieces of benches, clubs, whatever they could lay their hands on, poured out of the Senate House and surged towards the Capitoline Hill. This wasn't the state's army, nor the city guard. This was the aristocracy itself, the best men, leading a vigilant force. Imagine the scene. Senators, men in their pristine white togas, now stained with sweat and fury, their faces contorted with rage, charging up the hill. They were not acting as legislators, but as a lynch mob. Tiberius's supporters, mostly unarmed or lightly armed, were taken by surprise. Panic erupted. The crowd scattered. Tiberius himself tried to flee. He stumbled. His toga, a garment designed for dignified pronouncements, not desperate sprints, probably hampered him. He was cornered near the Temple of Jupiter, or perhaps by the statues of the ancient kings, a grimly ironic location. There, under the gaze of Rome's gods and its long-dead monarchs, Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, tribune of the plebs, champion of the landless, was bludgeoned to death. Sources differ on who struck the first blow, but Nasica is often implicated as leading the charge. It wasn't a clean, swift execution. It was a brutal, frenzied beating. And it didn't stop with Tiberius. His closest supporters were hunted down. Over the next few days, around 300 of them were killed, their bodies, including that of Tiberius, unceremoniously dumped into the Tiber River, denied proper burial rites, a profound insult in Roman culture, believed to condemn their souls to wander restlessly. The message was brutally clear. This is what happens to those who challenge the Senate's authority too far, who dare to appeal directly to the people over the heads of the elite. Reform would be met not with debate, but with clubs and daggers. The asterisk most maiorum asterisk, the way of the ancestors, had been invoked to justify the murder of a Roman magistrate in broad daylight, in a sacred space, by other Roman magistrates and elates. But what tradition was this? The tradition of oligarchic power preserving itself at all costs. The immediate aftermath was one of shock and fear, but also of grim satisfaction in certain quarters. The Senate moved quickly to legitimize its actions, setting up a special court to prosecute Tiberius's surviving followers, further entrenching the narrative that he had been a dangerous revolutionary. Nasica, despite being Pontifex Maximus, had blood on his hands. To shield him from popular retribution, and perhaps from his own conscience, though that's harder to gauge, the Senate discreetly sent him on a mission to Asia Minor, where he died soon after, out of sight, out of mind. But the ghost of Tiberius Gracchus, and the cause for which he died, would not be so easily exorcised. The Land Commission, though hampered, continued its work for a time. The Jenny of popular discontent, once released, could not be simply stuffed back into the bottle. And more importantly, Tiberius had a younger brother, Gaius Sempronius Gracchus. He had witnessed his brother's rise, his struggles, and his horrific end. For a decade, Gaius remained largely in the background, serving his military duties, biding his time. But the memory of Tiberius and the burning injustice of his murder was surely a fire in his belly. The first drops of political blood had been spilled, not by an invading army, but by Romans upon Romans in the very heart of the Republic. It was a stain that would prove impossible to wash away. It would seep deeper into the fabric of Roman political life, normalizing violence as a tool of persuasion, a means of settling disputes. The seeds of dissent, watered by Tiberius's blood, were not dead. They were merely dormant, waiting for a new, perhaps more radical, perhaps more cunning gardener. The Republic had survived Tiberius Gracchus, but it had been grievously wounded in the process, and the scar tissue that formed would be ugly and prone to tearing open again and again. The Age of Innocence, if Rome ever truly had one, was definitively over. Chapter 4. The younger brother's ambition, Gaius Gracchus and the widening cracks 10 years. An eternity in politics, yet a fleeting moment in the grand sweep of Roman history. For 10 years after the brutal slaying of his older brother, Gaius Sempronius Gracchus walked a careful path. He wasn't a recluse, but he wasn't Tiberius Redux, not yet. He fulfilled his duties, serving as quaestor in Sardinia, gaining administrative and military experience, and, crucially, staying alive. One can only imagine the thoughts that churned within him during that decade: grief, rage, a burning desire for justice, or perhaps vengeance, and undoubtedly, a meticulous study of his brother's successes and failures. He wasn't Tiberius. Where Tiberius was perhaps driven by a purer, more singular idealism focused on the land issue, Gaius was a more complex, multifaceted figure. He was arguably more pragmatic, more politically astute, and possessed a broader vision for reforming Roman society. He was also, by all accounts, a far more fiery and captivating orator, capable of whipping crowds into a frenzy with his passion and his denunciations of senatorial corruption and incompetence. If Tiberius had inadvertently kicked open a door, Gaius was preparing to charge through it with a comprehensive program that would shake the Republic to its core. In 123 BCE, the time was ripe. Gaius Gracchus stood for the tribuneship, and unlike his brother's fraught second attempt, he was elected and then re-elected for 122 BCE. The people had not forgotten Tiberius, and the grievances he championed were, if anything, more acute. The Senate, perhaps, had grown complacent or underestimated the younger Gracchus. They were about to learn otherwise. Gaius didn't just pick up his brother's land reform bill, though he did reinforce and expand it. He'd unleashed a barrage of legislation, the Legis Sempronia aimed at fundamentally altering the balance of power in Rome. He was building a coalition, a broader base of support than Tiberius had ever managed. Think of his program as a multi-pronged assault on the Senate's traditional dominance. First, the *** grain law, **lex frumentaria, ****. This provided for the sale of grain to Roman citizens at a subsidized, fixed low price. To his supporters, this was a vital measure of social welfare, ensuring the urban poor didn't starve, a way of acknowledging the state's responsibility to its citizens. To his detractors, it was a blatant populist bribe, a way of buying the loyalty of the mob, creating a dependent class, and draining the treasury. The gritty truth? Probably a bit of both. It undeniably alleviated suffering, but it also undeniably strengthened Gaius's political hand. Second, *** judicial reform, **lex Acilia repetundarum **, and others **. This was a direct hit at senatorial corruption. For decades, senators had exclusively served as jurors in the extortion courts. The courts that tried provincial governors accused of corruption and abuse a rampant problem. Surprise, surprise, these senatorial juries were notoriously lenient on their senatorial peers. Gaius changed the composition of these juries, transferring them to the **, the equestrian class, wealthy businessmen, publicans, tax collectors, and bankers who were often in commercial competition or conflict with the senators. This was a masterstroke. It didn't just aim for fairer trials, it drove a wedge between the two wealthiest orders in Rome, creating a powerful new ally for Gaius in the equestrians, who now had a vested interest in seeing his reforms succeed. Third, *** public works and infrastructure ***. Gaius initiated ambitious road-building projects throughout Italy. This provided employment, improved communications and trade, and not incidentally, allowed for the faster movement of troops, though that may not have been his primary intention. It also, of course, offered opportunities for contracts and patronage, further cementing his support. Fourth, *** military reforms ***. He addressed issues like the state providing clothing and equipment for soldiers and forbade the enlistment of boys under 17. These were popular with the common soldiers and their families, addressing genuine grievances. And then the most controversial, the one that would ultimately prove his undoing, the *** proposal to grant Roman citizenship, or at least Latin rights, to Rome's Italian allies, **soci****. This was audacious. For centuries, the Italian allies had fought and died alongside Roman legions, forming the backbone of Rome's military might. Yet they were denied the full rights and privileges of Roman citizens. They couldn't vote, couldn't stand for office, and were often subject to harsher treatment by Roman magistrates. Gaius saw the injustice and perhaps the strategic advantage of enfranchising a vast new block of grateful voters. But here he overreached. This proposal alienated many of his existing supporters among the Roman plebs. Why share their hard-won privileges, their subsidized grain, their access to land, with these outsiders? The Roman mob, for all its talk of popular rights, could be fiercely parochial and jealous of its own status. And the Senate, of course, was vehemently opposed. Granting citizenship on such a scale would dilute their control, dramatically alter the political landscape, and potentially give immense power to whoever championed the Italians' cause, namely Gaius Gracchus. The cracks Tiberius had exposed were now widening into chasms under Gaius's relentless legislative assault. He was playing a high-stakes game, juggling the interests of the urban poor, the equestrians, and potentially the Italians, all while facing the implacable hostility of the senatorial elite. He was a whirlwind of activity, a constant presence in the forum, overseeing his projects, delivering electrifying speeches, a man driven by a seemingly inexhaustible energy. But his enemies were not idle. They learned from their experience with Tiberius. Direct confrontation had been bloody and created a martyr. This time, they would be more subtle at first. They'd found their own tribune, Marcus Livius Drusus the Elder, to outbid Gaius in populist appeal. If Gaius proposed founding a few colonies for the poor, Drusus would propose founding more and with better terms. If Gaius offered subsidized grain, Drusus might hint at even greater largesse. It was a cynical game of one-upmanship designed to chip away at Gaius's popular support, to make him seem less unique, less essential. And the citizenship proposal for the Italians became the perfect wedge issue. It allowed his opponents to paint Gaius as someone who cared more for foreigners than for true Romans. The old xenophobia, never far beneath the surface, was skillfully exploited. Gaius's second tribuneship was coming to an end. He decided to stand for a third, a move that, while perhaps not as unprecedented as his brother's attempt at a second consecutive term had been, there was some ambiguity, still reeked of excessive power in the eyes of his enemies. And this time, the machinations against him were more effective. His popularity, while still significant, had been eroded. He failed to secure re-election for 121 BCE. Suddenly, Gaius Gracchus was a private citizen. Like his brother before him, he was vulnerable. The sacrosanctity of the tribune's office was gone. His enemies, led by the consul Lucius Opimius, a man known for his ruthlessness and his deep personal animosity towards Gaius, began to circle. They started by proposing the repeal of some of Gaius's laws, particularly those related to the founding of a colony at Carthage, a site some considered cursed. It was a deliberate provocation, designed to draw Gaius and his supporters out. The air in Rome, once again, grew heavy with the premonition of violence. Gaius knew it. His supporters knew it. The question was, could he escape his brother's fate? Or was the pattern now set, the script written in Tiberius's blood, merely awaiting its next tragic performance? The seeds of dissent had sprouted into a thorny, dangerous thicket, and the Republic was about to get even more entangled. Chapter 5. The final decree and the Aventine stand. History repeats with interest The year 121 BCE. The atmosphere in Rome is electric, not with the excitement of games or festivals, but with the raw, nervous energy of impending conflict. Lucius Opimius, the consul, is the Senate's chosen instrument, a man with an iron will and, it seems, very few scruples when it came to crushing the Grecan movement once and for all. The attempts to dismantle Gaius Gracchus's legislative legacy were the sparks deliberately thrown onto dry tinder. One morning, as a vote was being prepared in the forum to repeal some of Gaius's laws, a scuffle broke out. Accounts, as always, are biased and contradictory. The Gracan side claimed one of Opimius's attendants insulted them and made a provocative gesture, leading to him being struck down and killed by an overzealous Gracan supporter. Opimius's side, naturally, portrayed it as an unprovoked murder, clear evidence of Gracan violence and revolutionary intent. The truth of who struck first, who provoked whom, is lost in the fog of partisan hatred. What matters is that Opimius had his pretext. He seized upon the attendant's death with alacrity. He had the body carried dramatically through the forum, displayed to incite public outrage against Gaius and his followers. He then convened the Senate. This is where the Senate took a momentous and terrifying step further than they had with Tiberius. They passed the Senatus Consultum Ultimum the final decree of the Senate. This was effectively a declaration of martial law, though the term didn't exist then. It urged the consuls to see to it that the Republic suffered no harm, vidient consuls ne quid res publica detrimenti capiat This vague but powerful decree essentially gave the consuls quasi-dictatorial powers to take any measures necessary to protect the state, bypassing normal legal procedures and restraints. It was a constitutional emergency brake, but one that could be easily abused to crush political opposition. Armed with the SDU, Opimius was unleashed. He summoned senators and equestrians loyal to the Optimate cause, and even armed some of their slaves and retainers. Cretan archers, mercenaries who happened to be in Rome, were also pressed into service. This wasn't just a senatorial lynch mob like the one that killed Tiberius. This was the state apparatus, or a significant faction of it, being mobilized for civil bloodshed. Gaius Gracchus and his core supporters, realizing the extreme danger, did not simply wait to be slaughtered in their homes. They, along with Marcus Fulvius Flaccus, a former consul and a staunch Gracan ally, withdrew to the Aventine Hill. The Aventine had ancient significance for the plebeians. It was the hill to which they had seceded in the early Republic to win their rights. It was a symbolic act of defiance, a desperate attempt to rally support, perhaps even to negotiate. They fortified their position as best they could. Some accounts say Gaius was reluctant to arm himself, still hoping for a peaceful resolution, or perhaps wanting to avoid the appearance of leading an armed insurrection. Flaccus, a more military man, was apparently more inclined to fight. But Opimius was in no mood for negotiation. He declared Gaius and Flaccus public enemies. He offered a reward for their heads, literally their weight in gold. Such a gruesome bounty, offered by a Roman consul for the heads of Roman citizens, one a former consul, the other a revered former tribune, was a shocking new low in the escalating brutality of Roman politics. The Aventine became a scene of a one-sided battle. Opimius's forces, including the deadly Cretan archers, besieged the hill. The Gracchians, poorly armed and outnumbered, stood little chance. Flaccus was killed fighting. Gaius, seeing all was lost, attempted to flee. Accounts of his final moments vary. One tradition says he ordered his faithful slave, Philocrates, to kill him to avoid capture and the humiliation Opimius had in store. Philocrates then, reportedly, killed himself. Another version has him being overtaken and killed by Opimius's men. Whatever the exact details, Gaius Sempronius Gracchus was dead. His head, along with Flaccus's, was brought to Opimius. The story goes that a certain Septimuleius, seeking the promised reward, filled Gaius's severed head with molten lead to increase its weight before presenting it. Whether true or a gruesome embellishment, it speaks volumes about the barbarity that had now fully infected Roman political life. The slaughter didn't end with Gaius and Flaccus. Opimius unleashed a wave of repression. Thousands of Gracchan supporters, some estimates say as many as 3,000, were rounded up, imprisoned, and executed without trial in the days that followed. Their property was confiscated. The Aventine, once a symbol of plebeian hope, was now stained with plebeian blood, shed by order of the Senate. Opimius, far from being condemned for this massacre, was hailed as a savior of the Republic by the Optimates. He even built a Temple of Concord in the Forum, a monumentally cynical gesture, supposedly to celebrate the restoration of harmony, but built on the corpses of his political opponents. It stood as a stark reminder of who held power and how they were prepared to maintain it. The Gracchi brothers were gone. Their reform movements, for the moment, were crushed. But their legacy was profound and deeply troubling. They had exposed the deep fissures in Roman society, the vast gap between rich and poor, the frustration of the landless, the grievances of the Italians, the corruption and intransigence of much of the senatorial elite. They had demonstrated the power of the tribuneship as a tool for radical change, and the willingness of the people to support charismatic leaders who championed their cause. But most ominously, their fates had demonstrated something else, that political disputes in Rome would no longer be settled by debate and compromise alone. Violence, sanctioned or unsanctioned, had become an accepted, even celebrated, part of the political toolkit. The murder of Tiberius was an outrage. The state-sanctioned slaughter of Gaius and his followers, justified by the asterisk Senatus Consultum Ultimum asterisk, set an even more dangerous precedent. The SCU would be invoked again and again in the coming decades, a legal fig leaf for political murder. The gritty truth is that the Gracchi, for all their idealism, inadvertently helped to unleash the very forces that would eventually destroy the Republic. They showed future ambitious men the path to popular power, and they showed the Senate how to respond with brutal force. The Republic had survived, yes, but it was a republic increasingly governed by fear, where the threat of violence simmered just beneath the surface of every political debate. The seeds of dissent, sown by inequality and injustice, had been watered by the blood of the Gracchi. They would lie dormant for a short while, but the problems they had tried to address had not gone away. In fact, they were festering. And the next generation of strongmen, men like Marius and Sulla, were watching, learning, and drawing their own conclusions from the tragic tale of the brothers Gracchus. The Symphony of Ruin had played its mournful overture. The main acts, bloodier and more devastating, were yet to come. Asterisk asterisk end of book I. Seeds of dissent asterisk asterisk. Asterisk asterisk book I. The rise of Marius and Sulla, when the legions came home asterisk asterisk. Introduction to Book Id ****. The ghosts of the Gracchi haunted the Forum, silent spectres in the sun-drenched colonnades and shadowy basilicas. Their reforms were largely dismantled or diluted, their followers cowed into silence or buried in unmarked graves. The optimates, the self-proclaimed best men, had seemingly triumphed, their grip on the Senate and the state reaffirmed by violence. But beneath the veneer of restored order, the Republic was profoundly, perhaps fatally, altered. The problems the Gracchi had so passionately, and ultimately fatally, tried to address — land hunger, urban poverty, the rights of Italian allies, the arrogance and corruption of the elite — didn't vanish with their deaths. They festered like untreated wounds, deepening the societal infections that plagued Rome. And into this simmering pot of unresolved tensions, a new kind of player was about to stride onto the stage. Not a scion of ancient nobility like the Gracchi, driven by intellectual idealism, but a novus homo ***, a new man, hailing from the rustic Italian countryside, his hands calloused, his ambition forged in the brutal crucible of Rome's endless wars. His name was Gaius Marius. He, and his eventual nemesis, the aristocratic Lucius Cornelius Sulla, would not just tinker with the mechanisms of power, they would hijack them. They would transform the Roman army, once the loyal servant of the state, into a force with its own political will, loyal primarily to its general. They would show Rome the true meaning of civil war, painting the streets of the city itself with the blood of its citizens. The era of Marius and Sulla was dawning, an age where the legionary eagle would cast a long, predatory shadow over the Senate House, and the Republic would learn that the sword, once drawn in domestic strife, is not so easily sheathed. The lessons of the Gracchi had been learned, but perhaps not the ones they intended. The age of political assassination was about to escalate into the age of the warlord. Chapter 1. The New Man from Arpinum, Marius and the Marian Reforms ****. Forget the refined accents of the Roman elite, the philosophical discourses in Greek, the carefully constructed careers built on lineage and patronage. Gaius Marius, born around 157 BCE in Arpinum, a rural town southeast of Rome, was a different breed. He was a new man, a ***novus homo ***, the first in his family to reach the Senate, let alone the consulship. His background was equestrian, respectable but not noble. He spoke Latin with a rough provincial accent, cared little for Hellenic culture, and possessed an unshakable belief in his own abilities and destiny. He was a soldier's soldier, tough, disciplined, and relentlessly ambitious. His path to power would not be through eloquent speeches in the Curia, but through valor on the battlefield and a shrewd understanding of the common soldier's grievances. Marius cut his teeth in the Numantine War in Spain, serving under Scipio Aemilianus, the destroyer of Carthage, and ironically, the brother-in-law of the Gracchi. He distinguished himself by his bravery and endurance, catching Scipio's eye. But the climb up the cursus honorum ***, the ladder of Roman political offices, was steep and slippery for a man without powerful ancestral connections. He served as tribune of the plebs, where he showed a populist streak and a willingness to challenge the Senate, and later as praetor. His marriage to Julia, an aunt of the future Julius Caesar, gave him a crucial link to an old patrician family, though one that was not, at that time, particularly prominent. The Republic, in the late 2nd century BCE, was facing new military threats. The Juguthine War in Numidia, North Africa, was dragging on, a messy, frustrating conflict characterized by Roman incompetence and allegedly widespread bribery of Roman commanders by the Numidian king, Jugurtha. The Senate seemed incapable of decisively winning the war, fueling popular discontent and accusations of aristocratic indolence and corruption. This was Marius's opportunity. Elected consul for 107 BCE, largely on a wave of popular anger at the Senate's handling of the war, Marius was given the command against Jugurtha. And here, he did something revolutionary, something that would change the Roman military and ultimately Roman politics forever. He opened recruitment to the legions to any Roman citizen, regardless of whether they owned property. Traditionally, Roman soldiers had to meet a minimum property qualification. They were citizen farmers fighting to defend their own land and stake in the Republic. But as we saw with the Gracchi, this class was shrinking. Marius, needing men for his African campaign, tapped into the vast pool of landless urban poor, the *capite sensi*, head count, men previously excluded from military service. Why did they flock to his banner? Not out of abstract patriotism, but for pay, for the promise of plunder, and, most importantly, for the prospect of a land allotment upon discharge, something the state was increasingly failing to provide, but which a powerful and successful general might secure for his veterans. This was the birth of the client army. These new soldiers owed their livelihoods, their futures, not to the distant, often ungrateful Senate, but to their general. Their loyalty was to Marius, the man who fed them, led them to victory and spoils, and promised them a secure retirement. This bond, forged in shared hardship and triumph on the battlefield, would become a potent political force, a private army masquerading as a state legion. Marius also made significant tactical and organizational reforms. He is often credited with reorganizing the legion into cohorts, 10 cohorts to a legion, each cohort consisting of 6 centuries, making it a more flexible and effective fighting unit. He standardized equipment, improved training, and emphasized discipline. The iconic legionary eagle standard, the *aquila*, became an even more potent symbol of unit pride and loyalty. His soldiers, known as Marius's mules for the heavy packs they carried, were tough, professional, and devoted to their commander. In Numidia, Marius, with his reorganized and re-energized army, eventually brought the war to a successful, if not entirely clean, conclusion. Jugurtha was captured, not by Marius himself in battle, but through the treachery of Jugurtha's father-in-law, King Bocchus of Mauritania, a betrayal engineered by Marius's ambitious and aristocratic quaestor, Lucius Cornelius Stubler. This detail, Sulla's role in the capture, would become a bitter point of contention between the two men later, a small spark that would eventually ignite a catastrophic fire. Marius returned to Rome a hero, the man who had succeeded where the effete nobles had failed. But an even greater threat was looming on the northern frontiers. Hordes of migrating Germanic tribes, the Cimbri and Teutones, who had already annihilated several Roman armies, panic-gripped Rome. Who could save them? The Senate, desperate, turned again to the new man from Arpinum. Marius was elected consul an unprecedented 5 consecutive times, 104 to 100 BCE, shattering republican tradition against holding the same office repeatedly. The *most maiorum* was being bent, then broken, out of fear and necessity. With his hardened professional legions, Marius met the Germanic threat. He annihilated the Teutones at the Battle of Aquae Sextia, Aix-en-Provence, in 102 BCE, and alongside his consular colleague Quintus Lutatius Catulus, crushed the Cimbri at the Battle of Versola in 101 BCE. The slaughter was immense. Rome was saved. Marius was hailed as the third founder of Rome, after Romulus and Camillus. His popularity was immense, his military prestige unmatched. But victory on the battlefield did not translate into smooth sailing in the treacherous waters of Roman politics. Marius, the brilliant general, was often a clumsy and indecisive politician. He needed land for his tens of thousands of demobilized veterans. The Senate, wary of his power and suspicious of his populist leanings, prevaricated. To get his veterans their due, Marius allied himself with radical tribunes like Lucius Appuleius Saturninus and Gaius Servilius Glaucia, men who were prepared to use violence and intimidation in the forum, echoing the dark days of the Gracchi, but with even less restraint. In 100 BCE, things came to a head. Saturninus and Glaucia, in their bid for power, overreached. Political violence escalated, a rival candidate for the consulship was murdered by their gangs. The Senate, horrified, finally passed the Senatus Consultum Ultimum and, in a bitter irony, called upon Marius, the consul, to restore order, to suppress his own political allies. Trapped between his loyalty to his veterans, whose land grants depended on Saturninus, and his duty as consul, Marius hesitated, then acted. He besieged Saturninus and Glaucia and their followers on the Capitoline Hill, another grim echo of Tiberius Gracchus. They surrendered on Marius's promise that their lives would be spared. But an angry mob, possibly incited by senators, broke into their makeshift prison in the Curia Hostilia and lynched them. Marius, the savior of Rome, was now tainted. He had armed the urban poor, creating a new kind of army. He had held the consulship in flagrant disregard of tradition, and now he had presided, however reluctantly, over another round of political bloodshed in the heart of Rome. His popular support waned. The Senate, while grateful for his suppression of Saturninus, remained deeply suspicious of him. Discredited and politically isolated, Marius, for a time, withdrew from the political limelight, traveling to the east. But he was not a man to stay in the shadows for long. His ambition and the deep-seated problems of the Republic ensured his return. The Marian reforms had sowed the seeds of military intervention in politics. The age of the warlords had truly begun. The question was, who would be the next general to turn his legions into a political weapon? The answer would soon emerge, and his name was Sulla. Chapter 2. The Social War. Italy in flames, Rome in turmoil. While Marius was reshaping the army and battling Germanic invaders, a deep, simmering resentment was reaching boiling point across the Italian peninsula. Rome's Italian allies, the ***, had been the backbone of its military expansion for centuries. They provided more than half of the manpower for Rome's legions, fighting and dying from Spain to Asia Minor. They shared the burdens of empire but were denied its full rewards. They were not Roman citizens. They could not vote in Roman assemblies, could not stand for Roman office, and were often subject to the arbitrary and sometimes brutal authority of Roman magistrates in their territories. They paid taxes, shed blood, but remained second-class subjects in an empire they had helped build. We saw Gaius Gracchus try and fail to address this festering injustice. His proposal to extend citizenship had been a key factor in his downfall, met with a wall of opposition from both the Roman elite and the Roman plebs, who jealously guarded their own privileged status. In the decades following Gaius's death, the issue hadn't gone away. If anything, the frustration of the Italians grew more acute as Rome's power and wealth expanded, and their own contributions continued to be undervalued. The year 91 BCE. Another idealistic tribune, Marcus Livius Drusus, son of the Drusus who had opposed Gaius Gracchus, ironically, took up the cause. Like Gaius, Drusus was a reformer from within the aristocracy. He proposed a package of laws: land distribution, subsidized grain, and most controversially, the granting of Roman citizenship to all Italians. He tried to build a broad coalition, even offering concessions to the Senate by proposing to restore senators to the extortion court juries from which Gaius Gracchus had removed them, in exchange for admitting 300 equestrians to the Senate. For a moment, it seemed Drusus might succeed where Gaius had failed. He had powerful allies, but the opposition, particularly from entrenched conservative senators and those who feared the dilution of their own political power and Roman identity, was fierce. Whispers of treason, accusations of stirring up the Italians filled the air. The parallels to the Gracchi were becoming uncomfortably clear. And then, history repeated itself with chilling precision. One evening, as Drusus was returning home, surrounded by a crowd of supporters, he was stabbed in the hallway of his own house by an unknown assassin. As he lay dying, he reportedly lamented, "Friends and kinsmen, will the Republic ever have a citizen like me again?" His murder was the spark that ignited the Italian tinderbox. The Italians, their hopes for peaceful enfranchisement once again brutally extinguished, saw no other option but to take up arms. This wasn't a foreign invasion. This was a rebellion from within, a desperate war for rights and recognition. The social war, from ***, meaning allies, also known as the Marsic War, after the fierce Marsi tribe, who were prominent among the rebels, erupted across Italy in 91 BCE. It was a brutal, devastating conflict. Imagine it. For 3 years, the Italian peninsula, the very heartland of Roman power, was a battlefield. Italians fought Romans, men who had previously served side by side in the legions, now slaughtering each other with a terrifying ferocity. The rebels were well organized, many of them veteran soldiers trained in Roman tactics. They formed their own confederation, Italia, with its own capital at Corfinium, renamed Italica, and even minted their own coins, some depicting an Italian bull goring the Roman wolf, a potent symbol of their defiance. Towns were besieged, fields burned, atrocities committed on both sides. The war was a nightmare for Rome. It exposed the fragility of its control over Italy and threatened to unravel the very fabric of its power. The Republic, already weakened by internal political strife, now faced a fight for its very survival against its own kinsmen. In this desperate hour, all generals were called back into service. Gaius Marius, his earlier political disgrace somewhat faded by the urgency of the crisis, was given at command. And alongside him, proving his own military prowess, was his former quaestor, now a rising star in his own right, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla, an aristocrat of ancient but impoverished lineage, was a stark contrast to Marius. Where Marius was gruff and rustic, Sulla was cultured, decadent, yet possessed of an icy ruthlessness and a brilliant military mind. Their rivalry, already simmering, would be further complicated by their service in the social war. Both achieved significant victories, but it was Sulla who often garnered more glory, much to Marius's chagrin. The war was a bloody stalemate for a time. Rome won battles, but the rebellion continued. The sheer cost in lives and resources was staggering. Eventually, Rome realized that military victory alone might not be enough, or would come at too high a price. In a classic example of Roman pragmatism, or perhaps cynical expediency, they decided to offer with one hand what they were denying with the other. In 90 BCE, the Lex Julia proposed by the consul Lucius Julius Caesar, an uncle of the more famous Julius Caesar, granted Roman citizenship to all Latins and Italians who had not taken up arms, or who laid them down immediately. This was a clever move, designed to detach wavering allies from the rebellion. It was followed in 89 BCE by the Lex Plotia Papiria which extended citizenship to all free male Italians south of the Po River who registered with a Roman praetor within 60 days. Another law, the Lex Pompeia granted Latin rights, a lesser form of citizenship, to communities in Transpodane Gaul north of the Po. These concessions, combined with continued Roman military pressure, often led by Sulla, who was distinguishing himself, gradually brought the war to an end by 88 BCE. The Italians had, in a sense, lost the war militarily, but won their primary political objective, Roman citizenship. The price had been horrific. Hundreds of thousands dead, Italy ravaged. But the political landscape of Italy was fundamentally transformed. Millions of new citizens were now, at least in theory, part of the Roman body politic. The integration of these new citizens would be a complex and contentious process, creating new challenges for the already strained Roman political system. How would they be registered in the voting tribes? Would they overwhelm the existing urban voters? These questions would fuel further political strife. But the immediate consequence of the social war was even more dire. The Republic had just endured a brutal internal conflict. Its treasury was depleted, its manpower strained. And now, with the Italian rebellion barely suppressed, a new massive threat emerged in the east. Mithridates VI, the ambitious king of Pontus, was challenging Roman dominance in Asia Minor and Greece, massacring tens of thousands of Roman and Italian residents in a coordinated slaughter known as the Asiatic Vespers. A rich command was up for grabs, the war against Mithridates. It promised glory, plunder, and immense political power for the successful general. Two men coveted it above all others: Gaius Marius, the aging hero, desperate for one last blaze of glory, and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, the victor of the social war, consul for 88 BCE, and the Senate's choice for the command. The stage was set for an even more destructive conflict, not between Rome and its allies, but between two of Rome's most powerful generals. The legions, now professionalized and loyal to their commanders, were about to be turned inward. The social war had accustomed Rome to the idea of Italians killing Italians. The next war would see Romans killing Romans on an unprecedented scale, and the Republic would take another giant leap towards the abyss. The flames that had engulfed Italy were about to spread to Rome itself. Chapter 3. Sulla's First March. The Unthinkable Act The year is 88 BCE. The embers of the social war are still glowing. Italy is scared and exhausted, but a new, lucrative war beckons in the east against Mithridates of Pontus. The Senate, in its wisdom, or perhaps due to Sulla's formidable reputation and current consulship, has assigned this prestigious command to Lucius Cornelius Sulla. He is busy in Campania, assembling his legions, preparing to depart for Greece to confront the Pontic king. He is at the height of his power, a proven general, an aristocrat, the man of the hour for the Optimate faction. But back in Rome, the political cauldron is bubbling furiously. Gaius Marius, now in his late 60s, his body failing but his ambition still burning fiercely, cannot bear to see this command, this final chance for glory and power, slip into the hands of his younger rival Sulla. He sees Sulla's rising star as a personal affront, a threat to his own legacy. Marius, the new man, had always been an outsider in the rarefied world of the senatorial elite, despite his multiple consulships and military triumphs. Sulla, for all his aristocratic lineage, was also something of an outsider due to his family's relative obscurity for generations, but he was now firmly the champion of the Optimates. The personal animosity between the two men, simmering since the Jugurthine War, was about to boil over with catastrophic consequences. Marius, ever the populist, finds an ally in Publius Sulpicius Rufus, a charismatic and ambitious tribune of the plebs. Sulpicius, for reasons that are debated, perhaps genuine reformist zeal, perhaps personal ambition, perhaps he was heavily in debt and saw an opportunity, proposes a series of controversial laws. One of these laws aims to fully integrate the newly enfranchised Italian citizens into the existing Roman voting tribes, rather than confining them to a few new tribes where their collective vote would be diluted. This would give the Italians significant political clout and, not coincidentally, make them grateful to Sulpicius and his Marian allies. Another, more explosive proposal is to transfer the Mithridatic command from Sulla to Marius. To get these laws passed, Sulpicius allegedly employs gangs of armed thugs to intimidate opponents in the forum, a tactic becoming depressingly familiar in Roman politics. Riots break out. The consuls, Sulla and his colleague Quintus Pompeius Rufus, no relation to the later Pompey the Great, attempt to halt public business by declaring religious holidays, a traditional way to stall unwelcome legislation. But Sulpicius's mob ignores them. Violence erupts. Pompeius Rufus's son, who is also Sulla's son-in-law, is killed in the rioting. Sulla himself is forced to seek refuge in Marius's house, a moment dripping with irony and humiliation for Sulla, and is compelled, under duress, to lift the religious ban. Sulpicius's laws are rammed through the assembly. Marius, by popular vote, however coerced, is now legally the commander of the war against Mithridates. Sulla, outwardly complying, leaves Rome, ostensibly to return to his army in Campania. The Marians probably think they have won. They have underestimated Sulla's audacity and his ruthlessness. Sulla reaches his legions, the very men he was about to lead to glory and riches in the east. These are veteran soldiers, loyal to him. He addresses them. He tells them how the command has been stolen from him, how Marius and Sulpicius have insulted their general, and by extension them. He speaks of the riches of the east that will now go to Marius's new recruits, not to them. He paints a picture of anarchy and illegality in Rome. He is, in essence, asking them to choose between their loyalty to the state, as represented by the recent popular vote, and their loyalty to him, their general, who promises them victory and reward. It is a pivotal moment. What Sulla is contemplating is unprecedented, unthinkable, to march a Roman army against Rome itself. For centuries, it was sacrilege for a Roman general to cross the *Pomerium*, the sacred boundary of the city of Rome, with an army under arms. It was the ultimate act of treason. Most of Sulla's officers, horrified at the prospect, refused to accompany him. Only one quaestor remains loyal. But the common soldiers, their loyalty to Sulla paramount, their hopes of plunder in the east threatened, roar their approval. They stone the envoys sent by Marius to take command of the legions. The die is cast, though no one says those famous words yet. With 6 legions, Sulla turns his army not towards Greece, but towards Rome. This is not a metaphorical crossing of a Rubicon. This is the literal march of a Roman consul at the head of a Roman army to attack the capital city of the Roman Republic. The shockwaves must have been immense. Rome is unprepared. Marius and Sulpicius scramble to organize a defense, arming gladiators and any citizens they can find. But they are no match for Sulla's hardened legions. Sulla's forces enter the city, fighting their way through the streets. It is the first time a Roman army has captured Rome. The gritty reality is street-to-street fighting, Roman soldiers killing Roman citizens in the very heart of the Republic. Houses are set on fire. The sacred city is violated by its own protectors. Marius and Sulpicius are declared public enemies. Sulpicius is hunted down and killed, his head displayed on the rostra in the Forum. A gruesome precedent that will become all too common. Marius, after a series of dramatic escapes and adventures that would become the stuff of legend, hiding in marshes, being captured, and then released by awestruck townspeople, manages to flee to Africa. Sulla is now master of Rome. He has his command back. He quickly passes laws to strengthen the Senate and curb the power of the tribunes and the popular assemblies. He forces the remaining senators to declare Marius and his key supporters outlaws. He presides over consular elections for the following year, 87 BCE, ensuring men he believes are loyal, or at least controllable, are elected. One of these is Lucius Cornelius Cinna. The other is Gnaeus Octavius. Sulla makes them swear an oath to uphold his new arrangements. Then, with Mithridates still rampaging in the east and his own position in Rome seemingly secured, Sulla finally departs with his army for Greece. He leaves behind a city traumatized, a constitution shattered, and a dangerous lesson learned. A Roman general with loyal legions can dictate terms to the Roman state, even with violence. The asterisk most maiorum asterisk has not just been bent, it has been broken and trampled underfoot. But Sulla's control over Rome is illusory. He has left a power vacuum and a burning desire for revenge among the Marian faction, and one of the consuls he helped install, Cinna, is not as loyal or controllable as Sulla had hoped. The moment Sulla's back is turned, the Marian exiles will begin to creep back, and Rome will descend into an even bloodier chapter of civil strife. Sulla may have won the first round, but the war for Rome is far from over. The unthinkable act of marching on Rome has opened a Pandora's box of violence and lawlessness. Chapter 4, The Marian Terror and Sulla's Return, Rivers of Blood ***. Sulla is gone, fighting Mithridates in the east, winning battles at Charonia and Orchomenus, but Rome, the city he liberated with his legions, is far from peaceful. His departure is the signal for his enemies to resurface, and the consul he left behind, Lucius Cornelius Cinna, quickly shows his true colors. Cinna, perhaps sensing the popular resentment against Sulla's high-handed actions, or perhaps driven by his own ambition, breaks his oath to Sulla and begins to agitate for the recall of Marius and the full enfranchisement of the new Italian citizens as Sulpicius had proposed. His consular colleague, Gnaeus Octavius, an optimate, opposes him. Violence erupts in the Forum yet again. This time, Cinna is driven out of Rome by Octavius and his senatorial supporters. He is declared a public enemy, but Cinna does not give up. He rallies support among the still disgruntled Italians and, crucially, among Roman troops still stationed in Campania, some of whom were perhaps sullen veterans unhappy with being left behind or new recruits. And then the old line returns. Gaius Marius, now 70 years old, embittered and burning for revenge, lands in Etruria from his African exile with a small force of mercenaries and desperate followers. He joins forces with Cinna. Together, these two outlaws, with an army composed of disaffected Italians, Marian loyalists, and even armed slaves promised freedom, march on Rome. For the second time in as many years, Roman armies are converging on the capital, not to defend it, but to conquer it. This time, the siege is longer, more brutal. Marius and Cinna cut off Rome's food supply. Starvation and disease begin to take their toll within the city walls. The Senate, leaderless and terrified, Sulla is far away. Octavius is no great general. Eventually capitulates in late 87 BCE. Marius and Cinna enter Rome, not as liberators, but as conquerors. What follows is one of the darkest chapters in Roman history, the Marian-Cinnan Terror. Marius, old, sick, and consumed by a paranoid fury, unleashes a wave of horrific retribution against his political enemies and anyone he suspects of supporting Sulla. Senators are dragged from their homes and murdered. Their heads are displayed on the rostra, a grotesque parody of public honor. Their property is confiscated. The city becomes a slaughterhouse. No trial, no due process, just summary execution on the whims of a vengeful old man and his equally ruthless allies. Imagine the fear. You are a senator. You once spoke out against Marius, or perhaps you simply stayed silent when Sulla marched. Now, every knock on the door could be Marius's death squads. The streets, usually bustling with commerce and life, are now filled with armed gangs, the stench of blood, and the cries of the dying. The great orator Marcus Antonius, grandfather of Mark Antony, is hunted down and killed, his head delivered to Marius as he dines. Quintus Lutatius Catulus, Marius's former co-consul and colleague in the victory over the Cimbri, is proscribed. He chooses to commit suicide by shutting himself in a freshly plastered room and suffocating from the fumes of a charcoal brazier rather than face Marius's butchers. Marius and Cinna have themselves declared consuls for 86 BCE, Marius for an unprecedented 7th time. But the old general does not live long to enjoy his bloody triumph. Just a few days into his consulship, in January 86 BCE, Gaius Marius dies, reportedly from pleurisy, perhaps hastened by his age, his exertions, and his excesses. Some said he died in a delirium, haunted by visions of Sulla and the Mithridatic command that had obsessed him. The new man from Arpinum, savior of Rome, then its scourge, was gone. Cinna, however, remains in control. For the next 3 years, 86 to 84 BCE, he rules Rome as a virtual dictator, holding consecutive consulships, largely ignoring the Senate and pushing through his agenda, including the full enfranchisement of the Italians. It's a period of uneasy calm, a Marian-dominated Rome, but everyone knows it's temporary. Sulla is still in the east. He has made peace with Mithridates. A peace many Romans consider too lenient, suspecting Sulla rushed it to deal with matters at home. And he is coming back, with his victorious, battle-hardened legions, loyal only to him. The dread in Rome must have been palpable. Cinna and his allies try to raise armies to oppose Sulla. They attempt to sow dissent among Sulla's troops. But Sulla's reputation and the loyalty he commands are too strong. In 84 BCE, as Cinna prepares to lead an army across the Adriatic to confront Sulla in Greece, his own soldiers, reluctant to fight a civil war against the famed general, mutiny and murder him. With Cinna dead, the Marian faction in Rome is rudderless, though still determined to resist. Men like Gnaeus Papirius Carbo and the younger Gaius Marius, Marius's son, try to rally forces. But Sulla lands in Italy in the spring of 83 BCE. He is not alone. Many young nobles, disgusted by the Marian regime or seeing Sulla as the winning side, flock to his banner. Among them is a charismatic young man named Gnaeus Pompeius, later Pompey the Great, who raises 3 legions from his father's veterans and clients in Picenum and offers them to Sulla. Another is Marcus Licinius Crassus, whose father and brother had been victims of the Marian terror. What follows is nearly 2 years of brutal civil war fought across the length and breadth of Italy. It's a war of attrition, of sieges, of pitched battles. The Samnites, old enemies of Rome who had been prominent in the social war and had supported Marius, fight with particular ferocity, seeing this as a last stand for Italian independence against Roman domination. The decisive battle comes in November 82 BCE, just outside Rome itself at the Colline Gate. It is a desperate, bloody affair, fought through the night. Sulla's wing is nearly broken, but Crassus, commanding the other wing, achieves a breakthrough. The Marian forces, including many Samnites, are utterly defeated. Thousands are taken prisoner. Sulla, in a chilling display of his ruthlessness, has some 3,000 to 6,000 Samnite prisoners, accounts vary, massacred in the Campus Martius, their screams clearly audible to the terrified Senate, which Sulla is addressing at that very moment. When senators react with alarm, Sulla calmly tells them to pay attention to his speech. It's merely some criminals being punished. Sulla is now the undisputed master of Rome and Italy. But his victory is not the end of the bloodshed. It is the beginning of a new, more systematic reign of terror. the Sullan prescriptions. Sulla, determined to eradicate his enemies and reward his followers, posts lists in the forum of proscribed individuals, men declared outlaws who can be killed by anyone, with a reward offered for their heads. Their property is confiscated by the state and often ends up in the hands of Sulla's supporters at bargain prices. Their sons and grandsons are barred from holding public office, a cruel punishment that extends for generations. This is not the chaotic, frenzied killing of the Marian Terror. This is cold, calculated, legalized murder on an industrial scale. Thousands perish. Senators, equestrians, wealthy citizens, anyone Sulla or his lieutenants deem an enemy, or anyone whose property they covet. Fortunes are made overnight by Sulla's cronies. Crassus, for one, lays the foundation of his immense wealth during the proscriptions. Italy is gripped by fear. Informers flourish. Old scores are settled. No one is safe. It's a witch hunt that tears apart the fabric of Roman society. Even Julius Caesar, then a young man connected to Marius by marriage, his Aunt Julia was Marius's wife. And Caesar himself was married to Cinna's daughter, Cornelia, is proscribed. He only escapes death through the intervention of powerful friends and by agreeing to divorce Cornelia, which he initially refuses to do, showing an early spark of defiance. Sulla, reluctantly sparing him, is said to have remarked prophetically, "In this Caesar I see many a Marius." Sulla, having waded through rivers of blood, now sets about remaking the Roman state in his own image. The symphony of ruin has reached a deafening, brutal crescendo. The Republic is not dead yet, but it is bleeding profusely from self-inflicted wounds, its traditional institutions hollowed out, its elite decimated, and its citizens terrorized into submission. The age of warlords has arrived with a vengeance. Chapter 5. Sulla Felix, dictator and architect of a doomed restoration. With Rome and Italy prostrate at his feet, his enemies dead, exiled, or cowering in terror, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, the man who had twice marched Roman legions against Rome, now faced a choice. He could rule as a military tyrant, a king in all but name, dispensing with the charade of republican forms altogether, or he could attempt something else. Sulla, for all his brutality, saw himself not as a destroyer of the Republic, but as its savior, its restorer. He believed the chaos and bloodshed of the past decades were the result of the erosion of senatorial authority and the rise of demagogic tribunes and overpowerful generals, ironic, given his own path to power. His solution? To turn back the clock, to rebuild the Republic on what he considered its traditional, aristocratic foundations. In late 82 BCE, the Senate, or what was left of it after the civil wars and proscriptions, dutifully passed a Lex Valeria named after the ***, Lucius Valerius Flaccus, who proposed it at Sulla's suggestion. This law appointed Sulla dictator legibus scribundis et rei publicae constituende dictator for the writing of laws and for the settling of the constitution. This was not the traditional Roman dictatorship, which was a temporary 6-month emergency office. Sulla's dictatorship had no time limit. He was granted absolute power to make laws, to execute citizens without trial, to reorganize the state as he saw fit. He adopted the agnomen Felix, the fortunate, the lucky one, a testament to his unwavering belief in his own destiny and divine favor. He particularly venerated Venus. Sulla, now Sulla Felix, dictator of Rome, embarked on a sweeping program of constitutional reforms. His aim was clear: to cripple the popular political institutions that had, in his view, caused so much turmoil, and to restore the Senate to its traditional position as the dominant force in Roman government. His key reforms included 1. Strengthening the Senate He increased the size of the Senate from around 300 to 600 members, filling its depleted ranks with his own supporters, primarily from the equestrian order who had backed him. This made the Senate more representative of the Italian elite, at least the wealthy part, but also ensured its loyalty to his new order. He also restored to the Senate control over the law courts, particularly the extortion courts, which Gaius Gracchus had transferred to the equestrians. 2. Weakening the tribuneship The office of tribune of the plebs, the instrument of the Gracchi, Saturninus, and Sulpicius Rufus, was severely curtailed. Tribunes lost their power to propose legislation directly to the popular assemblies without prior senatorial approval. Their veto power was likely restricted, and most damagingly, holding the tribuneship was made a dead-end job. Anyone who served as tribune was barred from holding any higher magistracy. This effectively neutered the office, ensuring no ambitious young politician would seek it. 3. Reforming magistracies and the cursus honorum ****. Sulla re-established strict rules for the cursus honorum ***, the sequence of political offices. Minimum ages for each office were enforced, and a mandatory 10-year interval was required before holding the same office again, a direct response to Marius's multiple consulships. The powers of provincial governors were also more clearly defined and limited in an attempt to prevent them from becoming overly mighty warlords, again deeply ironic. He increased the number of praetors and quaestors to staff the expanding administration and new courts. 4. Abolishing grain subsidies The subsidized grain doles, a cornerstone of popular support for reformers like Gaius Gracchus, were abolished or severely restricted, seen by Sulla as a source of corruption and mob dependence. 5. Settling veterans Sulla settled tens of thousands of his veterans on confiscated lands throughout Italy, particularly in areas that had resisted him, like Etruria and Sanium. This created loyal Sullan enclaves across the peninsula, but also caused immense resentment among the dispossessed. These Sullan colonies would be a source of instability for years to come. Sulla's reforms were comprehensive, meticulously planned, and ruthlessly implemented. He ruled with an iron fist, but he also, in his own way, tried to create a stable, orderly state. He oversaw vast building projects in Rome, including the reconstruction of the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, which had burned down during the Marian conflicts. He revised Roman law. And then, in 79 BCE, having put his new constitution in place, Sulla did something truly astonishing. He voluntarily resigned his dictatorship. He laid down his absolute power, dismissed his lictors, his official bodyguard, and retired to private life at his lavish villa in Puteoli on the Bay of Naples. He spent his final year writing his memoirs, now sadly lost, except for fragments quoted by later authors, hunting, fishing, and indulging in the debauched pleasures for which he was also notorious. He died in 78 BCE, reportedly from a gruesome illness, liver failure, perhaps, or a ruptured ulcer, his body consumed by lice in his final days, a rather squalid end for the man who had styled himself Fedex. His funeral in Rome was on an unprecedented scale, a massive public display orchestrated by his supporters, a testament to the power he had wielded. What was Sulla's legacy? He had, for a time, imposed order on a chaotic republic. He had decisively shifted power back to the Senate. But his methods, civil war, proscriptions, the brutal suppression of opposition, had inflicted deep and lasting wounds on Roman society. He had shown that a general with a loyal army could not only defy the state, but could conquer it and remake it. He had set precedents for political violence and the use of military force in domestic politics that could not be unlearned. His constitutional settlement, designed to be permanent, proved remarkably fragile. The very man who had served under him, who had benefited from his prescriptions and his rise to power, men like Pompey and Crassus, would soon begin to dismantle his system in pursuit of their own ambitions. The tribuneship, so savagely neutered by Sulla, would quickly regain its powers, precisely because ambitious politicians found it a useful tool. The social and economic problems that had fueled the earlier unrest had not been solved, merely suppressed. Sulla had tried to restore the old republic, but the republic he restored was a hollow shell, its spirit broken, its traditions violated beyond repair. He was, in essence, an architect of a doomed restoration. He had shown the way for future strongmen, even as he sought to prevent their rise. The symphony of ruin had paused, catching its breath after Sulla's bloody reign, but the orchestra was merely retuning for the next, even more dramatic, movement, which would feature new soloists. Pompey, Crassus, and a man whose name Sulla himself had once uttered with prophetic dread, Gaius Julius Caesar. The path from Sulla's dictatorship to Caesar's was not long, and it was paved with Sulla's own brutal lessons. End of Book II. The Rise of Marius and Sulla. Book II. The First Triumvirate, A Conspiracy of Giants. Introduction to Book II. Sulla Felix was dead, his body entombed with honors, his constitution, a monument to optimate ideals built on a foundation of blood and terror, supposedly guiding the restored republic. But Rome, like a patient recovering from a near-fatal illness, was weak, scared, and deeply changed. The Sullan settlement, for all its architects' ruthless determination, proved to be a temporary dike against a rising tide of ambition and unresolved conflict, not a permanent bulwark. The men Sulla had inadvertently mentored in the arts of war and political ruthlessness, his Sulla's pups, as they were sometimes called, were now grown wolves, hungry for power, and they had learned Sulla's most potent lesson, that legions and popular acclaim could trump senatorial authority and ancient tradition. The 2 decades following Sulla's death were a bewildering kaleidoscope of political intrigue, provincial rebellions, slave revolts, and ongoing senatorial dysfunction. The Optimates, notionally in control, struggled to govern an empire groaning under its own weight, its institutions creaking, its elites factious and often corrupt. And into this volatile environment stepped 3 men, giants of their age, whose ambitions were too vast for the crumbling framework of the Sullan Republic to contain. They were Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, the military prodigy who had served Sulla but craved popular recognition beyond the Senate's grudging acceptance, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the enormously wealthy survivor of the Marian Terror, a master of backroom deals and financial power, and Gaius Julius Caesar, the charismatic patrician with Marian connections, boundless ambition, and a genius for popular politics and military command that was only beginning to reveal itself. Their informal alliance, forged in secrecy and mutual self-interest, known to history as the First Triumvirate, was not a constitutional body but a private pact, a conspiracy of power brokers designed to bypass the Senate and carve up the state for their own benefit. It was a tacit admission that the Republic, as it was then constituted, could no longer manage its most powerful citizens. This 3-headed monster, as its critics called it, would dominate Roman politics for a decade, its internal dynamics, a complex interplay of ambition, rivalry, cooperation, and eventual betrayal, setting the stage for the final cataclysmic civil wars that would extinguish the Republic's flickering flame. The Sullan restoration was about to be systematically dismantled by Sulla's own heirs, and Rome would take another giant stride towards one-man rule. Chapter 1. Pompey Magnus and Crassus the Rich, Sulla's pups bite back. The immediate aftermath of Sulla's death in 78 BCE was not peace, but renewed, albeit localized, turmoil. One of the consuls for that year, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, father of the future triumvir, attempted to overthrow Sulla's constitution almost before Sulla's funeral pyre had cooled. He advocated for the restoration of the tribune's powers, the return of confiscated property, and the recall of Marian exiles. It was a direct challenge to the Sullan order, and it quickly escalated into an armed uprising in Etruria, one of the regions hardest hit by Sulla's confiscations. The Senate, panicked, turned to a young man who, despite holding no formal office, already possessed a private army and considerable military prestige, Gnaeus Pompeius. Pompey, still in his 20s, had been one of Sulla's most brilliant and ruthless lieutenants. He had earned the nickname *Agilicentulus Carnifex*, teenage butcher, for his brutal suppression of Marian forces in Sicily and Africa. Sulla himself, impressed by his audacity and success, had reluctantly granted him a triumph, an honor usually reserved for ex-consuls or ex-praetors, and hailed him as Magnus the Great. Now, Pompey, operating with a special command, an *imperium*, granted by a nervous Senate, swiftly crushed Lepidus's revolt. Lepidus fled to Sardinia, where he died. Pompey had once again saved the Sullan establishment, but his very success, his irregular commands, his popular acclaim, made him a problematic figure for the strict Optimates. He was too powerful, too independent, too sullen in his methods, yet not entirely one of them. Meanwhile, another crisis was brewing in Spain. Quintus Sertorius, a brilliant Marian general who had refused to surrender after Sulla's victory, had established a veritable independent Roman state in Spain, rallying Marian exiles and native Spanish tribes. He was a military genius, repeatedly defeating senatorial armies sent against him. The war dragged on, a major drain on Roman resources and a constant embarrassment to the Senate. In 77 BCE, after his victory over Lepidus, Pompey, still without holding any regular magistracy, demanded and received the command against Sertorius, again with extraordinary powers. The Senate, having no better options, reluctantly agreed. Pompey's career was becoming a string of special appointments, a testament to his indispensability, but also a dangerous deviation from republican norms. While Pompey was bogged down in Spain for several years, fighting a difficult war against the elusive Sertorius, who was eventually assassinated by his own jealous officers in 72 BCE, paving the way for Pompey's final victory, Italy itself faced an internal threat of terrifying proportions: the slave revolt led by the Thracian gladiator Spartacus. Starting in 73 BCE, with a small band of escaped gladiators from Capua, Spartacus's rebellion swelled into a massive slave army, tens of thousands strong. They roamed the Italian countryside, defeating several Roman armies, plundering estates, and inspiring terror among the Roman elite. For 2 years, Spartacus and his followers held much of southern Italy hostage, a shocking indictment of Rome's internal security and the brutal conditions of slavery that underpinned its economy. The Senate, in panic, turned to another of Sulla's former lieutenants, Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus, now one of the wealthiest men in Rome, having profited immensely from Sulla's prescriptions and through shrewd, if sometimes ruthless, business dealings, including his infamous private fire brigade that would only fight fires after negotiating a price for the burning property, was eager for military glory to match his wealth and political influence. He was given Praetorian command and 8 legions to crush Spartacus. Crassus, after some initial setbacks and a brutal display of discipline, he revived the ancient punishment of decimation, killing 1 in every 10 men in a cohort that had fled before the enemy, finally cornered and defeated Spartacus's army in Lucania in 71 BCE. Spartacus himself died fighting. Crassus had some 6,000 captured slaves crucified along the Appian Way, from Rome to Capua, a horrific display of Roman power and a warning to any other slaves contemplating rebellion. The crucified bodies, left to rot for weeks, perhaps months, would have been a truly ghastly sight, the stench of death hanging heavy over one of Italy's main arteries, a grim testament to the gritty truth of Roman control. As Crassus was mopping up the remnants of Spartacus's forces, Pompey was returning from Spain, having finally subdued the last Sertorian holdouts. By chance, Pompey encountered and wiped out a band of 5,000 fugitive slaves trying to escape northwards from Spartacus's defeated army. With characteristic arrogance, Pompey wrote to the Senate, claiming that while Crassus had merely defeated slaves in a pitched battle, Pompey had extirpated the war by its roots. This infuriated Crassus, who felt Pompey was stealing his glory. The rivalry between these 2 powerful men, already present, was sharply intensified. Both Pompey and Crassus now stood outside Rome with their victorious armies, both demanding the consulship for the year 70 BCE. Neither was strictly eligible by Sulla's laws. Pompey was too young and had not held the prerequisite offices of quaestor and praetor. Crassus was eligible, but his demand was backed by the implicit threat of his legions. The Senate was in a bind. 2 of Sulla's most powerful pups were now baring their teeth at the sullen constitution itself. Faced with the prospect of another civil war, the Senate caved. Pompey and Crassus were elected consuls for 70 BCE, and in a remarkable turn of events, these 2 former Sullan loyalists, now in power, proceeded to systematically dismantle key parts of Sulla's constitution. They'd fully restored the powers of the tribunes of the plebs, the very office Sulla had sought to neuter. Why? Because both men, especially Pompey, craved popular support as a counterweight to senatorial opposition. The tribuneship was a useful tool for ambitious politicians to propose special commands and land grants, things both Pompey and Crassus desired. They also, with the help of the censor Lucius Aurelius Cotta, reformed the juries for the extortion courts yet again, creating mixed juries of senators, equestrians, and tribuni aurori another wealthy class, effectively ending the Senate's exclusive control restored by Sulla. Sulla's system was unraveling, not even a decade after his death, at the hands of his own proteges. Pompey and Crassus, though rivals, had found common cause in advancing their own careers, even if it meant undoing the work of their former master. They had shown that military might and popular backing could force the Senate's hand. The Republic was becoming a playground for overpowerful individuals. Pompey, in particular, went on to achieve even greater military glory. In 67 BCE, through the Lex Gabinia proposed by the tribune Aulus Gabinius, a Pompeian ally, he was granted an extraordinary 3-year command with unprecedented powers and resources to clear the Mediterranean of pirates who had become a serious menace to Roman trade and grain supplies. Pompey, with his usual efficiency and brilliance, accomplished this task in a mere 3 months, a stunning success that further enhanced his popular hero status. Then, in 66 BCE, through the Lex Manilia proposed by the tribune Gaius Manilius, and famously supported by the orator Marcus Tullius Cicero, who saw Pompey as a bulwark against chaos, Pompey was given command of the ongoing war against Mithridates of Pontus, who had resurfaced, and Tigranes of Armenia. This command superseded that of Lucius Licinius Lucullus, another Sullan general who had been fighting Mithridates with considerable success for years, but had fallen foul of powerful financial interests in Rome. Pompey, armed with vast powers, campaigned in the east for several years, 66 to 62 BCE, decisively defeating Mithridates, who eventually committed suicide, conquering vast new territories for Rome, reorganizing the entire eastern Mediterranean, and amassing enormous personal wealth and patronage. He returned to Italy in 62 BCE as the undisputed military hero of his age, a conqueror on par with Alexander the Great. The question on everyone's lips in Rome was, what would Pompey do now? He had a victorious army, immense prestige, and the adulation of the masses. Would he follow Sulla's example and march on Rome? Would he demand a dictatorship? The Senate was terrified. But Pompey, for all his ambition, was at heart a more traditional figure than Sulla, or, as it would turn out, Caesar. He surprised everyone. Upon landing at Brundisium, he disbanded his army, a gesture of respect for republican tradition. He wanted recognition, honors, land for his veterans, and ratification of his eastern settlements by the Senate. He expected the grateful Senate to shower him with accolades. He was sorely mistaken. The optimates in the Senate, led by figures like Lucius Licinius Lucullus, still bitter about losing his command to Pompey, Marcus Porcius Cato, Cato the Younger, a stoic purist and unyielding defender of traditional senatorial authority, great-grandson of Cato the Censor, and others were deeply suspicious of Pompey's power. They feared he aimed to become a de facto king. They prevaricated, obstructed, and humiliated him. They quibbled over the details of his eastern settlements, refused to ratify them en bloc, and delayed granting land to his veterans. Pompey, the conqueror of the East, found himself politically isolated and frustrated in Rome. Crassus, still his rival, did little to help, and it was into this political impasse that a third figure, returning from his governorship in Spain, deeply in debt but bursting with ambition, was about to step: Gaius Julius Caesar. The stage was being set for an alliance that would change Rome forever. The individual ambitions of these sullen hares, clashing with the Senate's attempts to reassert its authority, were creating the perfect conditions for a new, more potent political configuration. Chapter 2, Enter Caesar. The making of a triumvir ***. While Pompey was conquering the East and Crassus was consolidating his wealth and political influence in Rome, Gaius Julius Caesar was steadily, almost stealthily, building his own career. Born in 100 BCE into an ancient patrician family, the Julians, who claimed descent from Iulus, son of Aeneas, and thus from the goddess Venus herself, Caesar's early life was shaped by the Marian-Sullan conflicts. His aunt Julia was Marius's wife, and he himself had married Cornelia, the daughter of Cinna. These Marian connections had nearly cost him his life during Sulla's prescriptions. He had defied Sulla by refusing to divorce Cornelia, a mark of his early courage and stubbornness. Pardoned, he had wisely left Rome for military service in the East, winning the civic crown, Rome's second highest military decoration, for saving a comrade's life at the siege of Mytilene. Caesar was a complex, multifaceted individual. He was a brilliant orator, second only, perhaps, to Cicero. He was a gifted writer, his later commentaries on the Gallic and Civil Wars being masterpieces of clear, concise Latin prose, and, of course, shrewd political propaganda. He was charming, affable, and possessed an uncanny ability to win the loyalty and affection of both the common people and his soldiers. He was also extravagant, constantly in debt, and driven by an almost superhuman ambition and energy. He understood, perhaps better than anyone of his generation, the changing dynamics of Roman politics, the power of popular appeal, the importance of military command, and the utility of ruthlessness when necessary. Returning to Rome after Sulla's death, Caesar began his climb up the cursus honorum*. He prosecuted corrupt Sullan governors, gaining a reputation as a champion of the people, a popularis*. He served as military tribune, quaestor in further Spain, where, according to legend, he wept before a statue of Alexander the Great, lamenting that Alexander had conquered the world by an age when he, Caesar, had achieved comparatively little. He became known for his lavish spending on public games as aedile in 65 BCE, currying favor with the urban masses, and further indebting himself to men like Crassus, who saw him as a useful, if potentially dangerous, political talent. In 63 BCE, a pivotal year, Caesar was elected Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome. This was a lifetime appointment, prestigious and influential, giving him an official residence in the Forum and considerable religious authority. He won it against two powerful senior optimates, a testament to his growing popularity and his skill in political maneuvering, and, undoubtedly, massive bribery, probably funded by Crassus. This was also the year of the Catilinarian conspiracy, a plot by a bankrupt and disgruntled patrician, Lucius Sergius Catilina, to overthrow the Republic. The consul for that year, Marcus Tullius Cicero, uncovered the plot and, with the backing of the Senate, including a Senatus Consultum Ultimum*, had several of the conspirators in Rome executed without trial. Caesar, in the Senate debate, argued for life imprisonment instead of execution, a stance that was constitutionally sounder and perhaps aimed at cultivating popular sympathy, but which led some to suspect him, unfairly, of involvement with Catiline. Cato the Younger, in contrast, passionately argued for execution and carried the day. This incident further highlighted the growing rift between populares like Caesar and staunch optimates like Cato. After serving as praetor in 62 BCE, Caesar was assigned the governorship of further Spain for 61 BCE. There, he showed his military talents, campaigning successfully against native tribes, restoring order, and, crucially, amassing enough plunder to pay off some of his enormous debts and enrich his soldiers. He returned to Rome in 60 BCE, eager for the ultimate prize, the consulship for 59 BCE. He also wanted a triumph for his victories in Spain. However, optimate opponents in the Senate, led by Cato, created a procedural dilemma. To stand for the consulship, Caesar needed to enter the city as a private citizen. To hold a triumph, he needed to remain outside the Pomerium*, at the head of his troops until the triumph was granted. Forced to choose, Caesar renounced his triumph and entered the city to campaign for the consulship, a clear indication of his political priorities. It was at this juncture that the political stars aligned, or rather were forced into alignment by Caesar's astute maneuvering. Pompey, as we've seen, was frustrated by the Senate's obstruction of his eastern settlements and veterans' land grants. Crassus, representing the interests of the powerful equestrian tax farming companies, *publicani*, was seeking a rebate for them on their overbid for tax contracts in Asia, a request the Senate was also blocking. Caesar saw his opportunity. He approached these two powerful, disgruntled figures and proposed an alliance. The First Triumvirate, a term coined later They themselves called it an amicitia friendship, or societas partnership was born. It was a secret pact, an informal agreement between Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus to pool their political resources, their influence, their wealth, and their client networks to achieve their individual aims, effectively bypassing the Senate when necessary. Caesar would get his consulship and then a lucrative proconsular command. Pompey would get his eastern settlements ratified and land for his veterans. Crassus would get his tax rebate for the publicani and a greater share of political influence. It was a purely pragmatic alliance of convenience, built on mutual self-interest, not on shared ideology or deep affection. Pompey and Crassus were still rivals. Cicero, the great orator and a key senatorial moderate, was invited to join them, but he refused, seeing the alliance as a threat to the Republican senatorial authority. He would live to regret and lament its consequences. This three-headed monster, as their optimate opponents like Cato and Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, Caesar's consular colleague-to-be, called it, was a powerful political machine. Caesar, as consul, would be its public face and legislative enforcer. Pompey, with his immense military prestige and veteran client base, provided the muscle and popular backing. Crassus, with his vast wealth and equestrian connections, provided the financial resources and backroom influence. The formation of the first triumvirate in 60 BCE was a watershed moment. It demonstrated that the traditional republican system, with the Senate at its heart, was no longer capable of managing, let alone controlling, its most powerful citizens. These three men, by combining their strengths, could effectively dictate policy. The Republic was now hostage to the ambitions and rivalries of a cabal of strongmen. Sulla's restoration was not just unraveling, it was being systematically subverted from within by a new generation of political titans who had learned all too well the lessons of the preceding decades. The era of senatorial dominance was drawing to a close. The era of the dynasts was beginning. Caesar, the junior partner in this alliance, was about to use his consulship to catapult himself into the first rank of Roman power. Chapter 3. Caesar's consulship, bending the Republic to breaking point. The year 59 BCE. Gaius Julius Caesar is consul of Rome. But he is not just any consul, he is the executive arm of the first triumvirate, the three-headed monster. His colleague in the consulship is Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, a staunch optimate, son-in-law of Cato the Younger, and utterly determined to obstruct Caesar at every turn. The stage is set for one of the most contentious and transformative consulships in Roman history. Caesar, with the backing of Pompey's veterans and Crassus's money, is about to demonstrate just how far he is willing to go to achieve his aims, and in doing so, he will stretch the fabric of republican legality to its breaking point. Caesar began his consulship with a conciliatory gesture, proposing an agrarian law for land distribution to Pompey's veterans and the urban poor. It was a carefully drafted bill, designed to be moderate and avoid the confiscation of private property that had made the Gracchan reforms so controversial. He even read it aloud in the Senate, seeking their approval and cooperation. But the optimates, led by Cato, were having none of it. They saw it as a blatant move to bolster Pompey's power and buy popular support. They'd filibustered, they obstructed, they refused to even debate the bill. Bibulus, Caesar's colleague, used every procedural trick in the book to delay a vote. Frustrated by senatorial intransigence, Caesar did what Tiberius Gracchus had done before him. He took his bill directly to the popular assembly. This was his right as consul, but it bypassed the traditional authority of the Senate. When Bibulus attempted to veto the proceedings in the assembly or announce unfavorable omens, a religious tactic to halt public business, he and Cato were roughed up by Pompey's veterans, who had packed the forum. Dung was thrown at Bibulus. His consular farces the bundle of rods symbolizing his authority, were broken. Terrified and humiliated, Bibulus retreated to his house, where he remained for the rest of his consulship, issuing periodic edicts declaring Caesar's actions illegal due to bad omens. This effectively left Caesar in sole, if controversial, control. Romans wryly joked that the consuls for 59 BCE were not Caesar and Bibulus, but Julius and Caesar. With Bibulus neutralized, Caesar, backed by the triumvirate's power, rammed through his legislative program. The agrarian law was passed, benefiting Pompey's veterans and the poor. Pompey's eastern settlements were ratified. Crassus got his tax rebate for the *publicani*. Caesar also passed laws against extortion in the provinces, *lex Julia de repetundis*, a popular measure that ironically would later be used by his enemies against his own supporters. But Caesar's most crucial piece of legislation for his own future was the *lex Vatinia*, proposed by the tribune Publius Vatinius, a loyal Caesarian. This law granted Caesar a 5-year proconsular command over Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy, and Illyricum, the Balkan coast. Unusually, and probably through Pompey's influence, the Senate later added Transalpine Gaul, southern France, to his command. This was an enormous provincia, strategically vital, and guaranteed to provide opportunities for military glory, plunder, and the recruitment of loyal legions. A 5-year command was also unusually long, giving Caesar ample time to establish his power base. Caesar's consulship was a masterclass in political hardball. He had used popular support, the threat of Pompey's veterans, and the financial clout of Crassus to overcome senatorial opposition and achieve his goals. But he had done so by trampling on tradition, by using intimidation, and by arguably violating the spirit, if not always the letter, of republican law. His enemies, particularly Cato and the Optimates, were enraged. They saw him as a dangerous demagogue, a future tyrant in the sullen mold, but even more cunning and ambitious. They'd bided their time, vowing to prosecute him for his actions once his proconsular command ended and he lost his immunity. Caesar knew this. His long command in Gaul was not just about conquest, it was about building a power base so strong that he would be untouchable upon his return. To secure his position while he was away in Gaul, Caesar took several steps. He arranged for the election of sympathetic consuls for the following year. He cemented his alliance with Pompey by giving him his only daughter, Julia, in marriage. This was a political marriage, but by all accounts, Pompey became genuinely devoted to Julia, and she to him. Her presence would be a crucial, if fragile, bond holding the two ambitious dynasts together. He also sought to neutralize his most prominent Optimate critics. Cicero, the great orator, whose eloquence could be a powerful weapon against the triumvirs, was targeted. Caesar had initially tried to woo Cicero, offering him a place on his agrarian commission or a staff position in Gaul. Cicero, torn between his republican principles and his fear of the triumvir's power, dithered, then refused. This refusal would have consequences. The instrument of Cicero's downfall was Publius Clodius Pulcher, a renegade patrician. He had himself adopted into a plebeian family to be eligible for the tribuneship, and a notorious rabble-rouser. Clodius, elected tribune for 58 BCE with the triumvir's backing, harbored a deep personal grudge against Cicero. Cicero had testified against him in a scandalous trial involving Clodius infiltrating the all-female Bona Dea rites disguised as a woman, allegedly to seduce Caesar's then-wife Pompeia. An incident that led Caesar to divorce Pompeia, famously remarking, "Caesar's wife must be above suspicion." Clodius passed a law retroactively punishing anyone who had executed Roman citizens without trial. This was clearly aimed at Cicero for his actions during the Catilinarian conspiracy. Cicero, abandoned by Pompey, who owed him for his support of the *lex Manilia*, but was now bound to Caesar, and seeing no hope of senatorial protection, chose voluntary exile to avoid prosecution and potential violence from Clodius's street gangs, which now terrorized Rome. Cato the Younger, Caesar's most unyielding Optimate opponent, was also cleverly removed from Rome. Clodius, again with the triumvir's tacit approval, passed a law assigning Cato the task of annexing Cyprus, which had been bequeathed to Rome, and organizing it as a province. This was a prestigious and responsible task, but it would keep Cato away from Rome and its political battles for a considerable time. Cato, ever the stoic, duty-bound Roman, accepted the assignment, though he knew it was a politically motivated exile. With his domestic front seemingly secured, his enemies silenced or removed, and his powerful command in Gaul awaiting him, Caesar departed from Rome in 58 BCE. He left behind a city cowed by the power of the triumvirate, its traditional political processes subverted. The Republic was still functioning, in a fashion, but it was clear that real power now lay not in the Senate House, but in the hands of the three men who had formed their private pact. Caesar was on his way to conquer Gaul. He would return 9 years later, not as a proconsul reporting to the Senate, but as a conqueror at the head of an invincible army, ready to challenge for supreme power. His consulship had bent the Republic. His Gallic Wars would provide him with the means to break it. *** Chapter 4 The Gallic Wars and the Cracks in the Triumvirate ***. As Caesar departed for Gaul in early 58 BCE, few in Rome could have predicted the scale of the conflict he was about to unleash, or the profound impact it would have on his own career and the fate of the Republic. His proconsular command was initially for Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy, and Illyricum, the Adriatic coast. Transalpine Gaul, modern Provence in southern France, already a Roman province, was added later. But Caesar, driven by boundless ambition and the need for military glory, resources, and a loyal army, was not content to merely govern these territories. He used, all manufactured, a series of provocations and threats from Gallic tribes to launch a full-scale conquest of the vast, diverse, and fiercely independent Celtic lands beyond Roman control, an area encompassing most of modern-day France, Belgium, parts of Switzerland, Germany, and even incursions into Britain. For nearly 9 years, 58 to 50 BCE, Caesar waged a relentless, often brutal, series of campaigns. His Commentarii de Bello Gallico Commentaries on the Gallic War, a masterpiece of spare, compelling prose and brilliant self-promotion, carefully crafted for public consumption in Rome, provides a detailed, if biased, account of these wars. He fought against a bewildering array of Gallic tribes, the Helvetii, the Belgae, the Novi, the Veneti, the Germans under Ariovistus. He crossed the Rhine into Germany twice, more as a show of force than for permanent conquest. He launched 2 expeditions to Britain in 55 and 54 BCE, the first Roman general to do so, an act that captured the imagination of the Roman public, even if its strategic gains were limited. Caesar proved himself to be a military genius of the highest order. He was a brilliant strategist and tactician, capable of daring maneuvers and rapid marches. He was an inspirational leader, sharing the hardships of his men, knowing many of them by name, and rewarding bravery. His legions, initially a mix of veterans and new recruits, were forged in the crucible of constant warfare into a hardened, disciplined, and fanatically loyal fighting force. They adored their general, who led them to victory after victory, and who ensured they were well supplied and rewarded with plunder. He increased their pay, a move that further bound them to him personally. These were Caesar's legions, not the Republic's, in all but name. The Gallic Wars were not just a series of glorious victories. They were also incredibly bloody and often involved acts of shocking brutality. Entire tribes were massacred or sold into slavery. Caesar himself, in his Commentaries sometimes recounts these episodes with a chilling detachment. The siege of Avaricum, the stronghold of the Bituriges, ended with the slaughter of almost its entire population of 40,000. At Uxellodunum, the final major Gallic resistance after Vercingetorix's defeat, Caesar had the hands of all surviving defenders cut off as a gruesome warning to others. He claimed, according to Plutarch, to have fought against 3 million men in Gaul, of whom 1 million were killed and another million enslaved. While these figures are likely exaggerated, they give a sense of the horrific human cost of his conquests. For Caesar, however, these were necessary measures to secure Roman dominion and enhance his own dignitas prestige, standing, and gloria glory. While Caesar was conquering Gaul, the political situation back in Rome was becoming increasingly unstable. The first triumvirate, a pact of convenience, was always a fragile alliance, dependent on the mutual needs and perceived benefits of its 3 members. With Caesar absent, the personal rivalry between Pompey and Crassus, never far beneath the surface, began to reassert itself. Clodius Pulcher, Caesar's agent of chaos, continued to dominate Roman street politics with his armed gangs, intimidating opponents and undermining senatorial authority. Pompey, initially supportive of Clodius, grew increasingly alarmed by his excesses and his own waning popularity. He eventually backed the recall of Cicero from exile in 57 BCE, hoping Cicero's oratory and senatorial influence could counter Clodius. Cicero returned to a hero's welcome, but he was a changed man, more cautious, more aware of the triumvir's overwhelming power. The cracks in the triumvirate were becoming apparent. Pompey was growing jealous of Caesar's stunning military successes in Gaul, which threatened to eclipse his own. Crassus, too, desired a major military command to rival those of Pompey and Caesar, to give him the military gloria that his vast wealth alone could not buy. Caesar from Gaul watched these developments with concern, using his immense wealth, derived from Gallic plunder, to maintain his network of agents and supporters in Rome, and to shower largesse on the city, funding for public buildings like the Basilica Julia. To patch up their fraying alliance, the three triumvirs met in 56 BCE at Lucca, a town in Caesar's province of Cisalpine Gaul. It was a remarkable spectacle. Rome's three most powerful men meeting outside Rome, effectively deciding the fate of the Republic. Around 200 senators and numerous magistrates traveled to Lucca to pay court to them, a clear demonstration of where real power lay. At the Lucca conference, they renewed their pact. It was agreed that Pompey and Crassus would be consuls again for 55 BCE. After their consulship, Pompey would receive a 5-year command in Spain, which he would govern in absentia through legates, remaining near Rome to manage affairs there, and Crassus would get a 5-year command in Syria, with the explicit aim of waging war against Parthia, Rome's wealthy and powerful eastern neighbor. Crucially for Caesar, his command in Gaul was extended for another 5 years, until late 50 or early 49 BCE, giving him more time to complete his conquests and strengthen his position. The Lucca agreement papered over the cracks for a time. Pompey and Crassus duly became consuls for 55 BCE, using strong-arm tactics to overcome obstinate opposition. But the underlying tensions remained. And then 2 events occurred that fatally weakened the bonds of the triumvirate. First, in 54 BCE, Julia, Caesar's daughter and Pompey's wife, died in childbirth. Her infant also died. This was a profound personal blow to both Caesar and Pompey, who were reportedly genuinely fond of her. But it was also a critical political loss. Julia had been the human link, the emotional glue, holding these 2 ambitious alpha males together. With her death, one of the main reasons for their personal alliance was gone. Caesar proposed new marriage alliances to Pompey, but Pompey, perhaps already drifting away, declined. Second, in 53 BCE, Crassus met his doom in Syria. Eager for military glory against Parthia, he launched an ill-prepared invasion into Mesopotamia. At the Battle of Carrhae, his army was annihilated by the Parthian horse archers and cataphracts, heavy cavalry. Crassus himself was killed, his head and hand cut off, and, according to legend, molten gold poured down his throat by the Parthians as a symbol of his notorious avarice. The loss of Crassus and 7 Roman legions was a military disaster for Rome, but it was also a political disaster for the triumvirate. Crassus, with his wealth and political influence, had often acted as a buffer, a balancing force, between the increasingly rivalrous Pompey and Caesar. With Crassus gone, the triumvirate was reduced to a triumvirate, a 2-man show, and there simply wasn't enough room in Rome for 2 such colossal ambitions. As the 50s BCE drew to a close, the political situation in Rome deteriorated further. Gang violence between Clodius's mobs and rival gangs, led by Titus Annius Milo, an Optimate-backed figure, became endemic. In 52 BCE, Clodius was murdered by Milo's men on the Appian Way. His supporters rioted, burned down the Senate House, the Curia Hostilia, as his funeral pyre, and plunged Rome into anarchy. The Senate, desperate, turned to Pompey, appointing him sole consul, an unprecedented move, to restore order. Pompey acted decisively, using troops to quell the riots and overseeing Milo's trial and conviction, despite Cicero's defense in the pro-Milone delivered under intimidation from Pompey's soldiers. Pompey was now the strongman of Rome, ostensibly aligned with the Senate and the Optimates, who increasingly saw him as their champion against the looming threat of Caesar and his Gallic legions. Caesar, his Gallic conquests largely complete after the suppression of Vercingetorix's great revolt at Alesia in 52 BCE, was watching events in Rome with growing unease. His command was due to expire. His enemies in the Senate, led by Cato, were baying for his blood, determined to prosecute him for his actions during his consulship and his alleged illegalities in Gaul as soon as he laid down his command and became a private citizen. Caesar knew he needed to secure another consulship, or at least maintain his proconsular immunity, until he could safely re-enter Roman politics on his own terms. The alliance that had dominated Rome for a decade was dead. Julia was dead. Crassus was dead. Pompey, once Caesar's ally and son-in-law, was now drifting inexorably into the camp of Caesar's optimate enemies. The stage was being set for a final apocalyptic confrontation between Rome's two greatest living generals. The Symphony of Ruin was approaching its most dramatic movement, civil war. The conquest of Gaul had given Caesar an invincible army and immense resources. The question now was, what would he do with them? The answer would tear the Republic apart. *** End of Book I. The First Triumvirate *** Book IV. Crossing the Rubicon. The die is cast ***. Introduction to Book IV ***. The 50s BCE had been a decade of breathtaking expansion and deepening political decay for Rome. While Caesar conquered Gaul, piling victory upon victory, creating an army loyal to his name alone, the bonds of the First Triumvirate had frayed and snapped. Julia, the human link between Caesar and Pompey, was gone. Crassus, the third leg of their political stool, lay dead in the Parthian desert, his legions annihilated. In Rome, political violence had become endemic, the Senate increasingly paralyzed, its authority usurped first by the Triumvir's Pact, then by Pompey's emergency powers as sole consul. Now, as the decade drew to its close, Pompey Magnus, once Caesar's ally, stood as the champion of the Optimates, the senatorial faction determined to bring Caesar to heel. Caesar, his proconsular command in Gaul nearing its end, knew the score. His enemies, led by the implacable Cato the Younger and the now overtly hostile Senate majority, were poised to strip him of his army, deny him the consulship he sought, which would grant him continued immunity from prosecution, and put him on trial for his actions during his controversial consulship of 59 BCE and his conduct of the Gallic Wars. For Caesar, with his immense dignitas and the unswerving loyalty of his hardened legions, such an outcome was unthinkable. It meant political annihilation, humiliation, perhaps even exile or death. The political maneuvering in Rome and in Caesar's winter camps became increasingly frantic and desperate through 50 and early 49 BCE. Tribunes loyal to Caesar, like Mark Antony and Quintus Cassius, vetoed senatorial decrees aimed at stripping Caesar of his command. Compromises were proposed and rejected. Ultimatums were issued. The air was thick with the stench of impending conflict, a conflict that no one truly wanted, yet everyone seemed powerless to prevent. The Republic, already battered and bruised, was stumbling towards the precipice of a full-blown civil war, a war that would pit Roman against Roman, legion against legion, on a scale that would dwarf even the horrors of Marius and Sulla. The question was no longer if but when one side would make the irrevocable move. And that move would come at a small river in northern Italy, a provincial boundary named the Rubicon. Caesar's decision there would not just cast the die for his own fate, but for the fate of the Roman Republic itself. Chapter 1. The Point of No Return. Alia Jacta Est. The winter of 50 to 49 BCE. The tension between Caesar and the Senate, now effectively controlled by Pompey and the Optimates, has reached a breaking point. Caesar is with one legion, the XIIth, at Ravenna, in his province of Cisalpine Gaul, just south of the Rubicon River. The Rubicon forms the sacred boundary between his province, where he can legally command troops, and Italy proper, where a general leading an army without senatorial permission is automatically deemed a public enemy. He has sent for more of his Gallic legions, but for now he waits, a coiled spring of barely suppressed energy. In Rome, the rhetoric is escalating. Caesar has offered compromises. He would lay down his command if Pompey did likewise. He would keep only a smaller command and 1 or 2 legions. But the hardline Optimates, scenting blood and encouraged by Pompey's confidence, Pompey famously and fatally boasted that he had only to stamp his foot in Italy and legions would rise to support him, are in no mood for compromise. They demand Caesar's unconditional surrender. He must disband his army, return to Rome as a private citizen, and face prosecution. On January 7, 49 BCE, the Senate, overriding the vetoes of Caesar's tribunes Mark Antony and Quintus Cassius, who then dramatically fled Rome to join Caesar, claiming their sacrosanctity as tribunes had been violated, passes the Senatus Consultum Ultimum asterisk. This final decree effectively declares a state of emergency and calls upon Pompey and the magistrates to see that the Republic comes to no harm, a clear signal for war against Caesar. News of the SCU and the flight of his tribunes reaches Caesar in Ravenna. For him, this is the final straw. The Senate has declared war not just on him, but on the sacred rights of the tribunes, the traditional protectors of the people. His dignitas has been irreparably insulted. His person and those of his loyal followers are now at risk. He addresses his soldiers of the XIth Legion. He speaks of the injustices done to him, of the Senate's arrogance, of the violation of the tribunes' rights. He reminds them of their shared victories in Gaul, of the loyalty they owe each other. His men, devoted to him, roar their support. They will follow him anywhere. The night of January 10th or 11th, 49 BCE, Caesar, after reportedly dining with friends and feigning nonchalance, leads a small contingent of his troops to the banks of the Rubicon. The moment is heavy with historical weight. To cross this insignificant stream with an army is to commit an act of treason, to declare civil war. Suetonius, the Roman historian, paints a dramatic picture, Caesar hesitating, pondering the immense consequences of his actions. He sees an apparition, a figure of supernatural size playing a pipe, who then snatches a trumpet from one of Caesar's men, sounds a warlike blast, and crosses the river. Whether this vision was real, a product of Caesar's overwrought imagination, or a later embellishment, it captures the enormity of the decision. Then, according to Suetonius and Plutarch, Caesar utters the famous words, either in Latin, *Elia iacta est*, the die is cast, or in Greek, quoting the playwright Menander, *ana hyptho kubos*, let the die be cast. The meaning is the same. The decision is made, the point of no return has been passed. There is no turning back. He orders his men forward. They splash through the shallow waters of the Rubicon. Imagine that moment. You are one of Caesar's legionaries. For 9 years, you have followed this man through the forests and mountains of Gaul, fought his battles, shared his triumphs and hardships. He is more than your general. He is your patron, your protector, the guarantor of your future. Now he asks you to commit treason, to march against your own capital, against the legitimate government of Rome, against Pompey the Great, a name once revered. But Caesar has framed this not as an attack on Rome, but as a defense of his own honor and the rights of the people embodied by the violated tribunes. Your loyalty is to him. And so you cross. The cold water of the Rubicon swirls around your calves. The fate of the world, though you may not fully grasp it, is shifting with every step you take. The crossing of the Rubicon is a symbolic act, but its practical consequences are immediate and devastating. Caesar, with astonishing speed, celeritas*, a hallmark of his generalship, sweeps down through Italy. Town after town opens its gates to him, either out of sympathy for his cause, fear of his legions, or simply a desire to avoid bloodshed. He is not behaving like Sulla, the butcher. He shows calculated clemency, *clementia*, pardoning those who resist him, winning hearts and minds, or at least neutralizing opposition. This policy of *clementia* is a powerful psychological weapon, contrasting sharply with the Optimate rhetoric that paints him as a bloodthirsty tyrant. In Rome, news of Caesar's crossing and his rapid advance creates panic. Pompey's confident boast about stamping his foot and raising armies proves hollow. The legions he expected to materialize do not. The Optimate senators, who had been so bellicose just days before, are now terrified. There is no army in Rome to defend the city. Pompey, realizing he cannot hold Italy, makes a fateful decision. He will abandon Rome and Italy, retreat eastwards to Greece, where he has vast resources, client networks, and where he can raise a massive army from the eastern provinces. He hopes to cut off Italy's grain supply, rally his forces, and then return to crush Caesar, much as Sulla had done against Marius and Cinna. Many senators, including Cato and Cicero, who is deeply dismayed by the turn of events, seeing fault on both sides, flee Rome with Pompey. The city, the heart of the Republic, is abandoned to Caesar. In late March, less than 3 months after crossing the Rubicon, Caesar enters Rome, not as a conqueror sacking the city, but as its de facto master, claiming to be upholding the constitution. He addresses the remaining senators, assuring them of his peaceful intentions, but making it clear he is in charge. He seizes the state treasury in the Temple of Sachin, brushing aside the protests of a brave tribune who tries to block him. When the tribune cites laws, Caesar reportedly retorts that laws are for peacetime. This is war. The die indeed was cast. Caesar's gamble had paid off spectacularly in its initial phase. He controlled Italy. But Pompey was still at large, with a formidable reputation and the resources of the Eastern Mediterranean at his disposal. The civil war was just beginning. It would be fought across the vast expanse of the Roman world, from Spain to Greece, from Africa to Asia Minor. And it would be a war not just for political supremacy, but for the very soul of the Roman Republic. The grinding sound of the Republic's foundations, first heard with the Gracchi, was now the deafening roar of full-scale civil war. Chapter 2. The world as a battlefield, Pharsalus and the Pompeian collapse With Italy secured, Caesar faced a strategic dilemma. Pompey, his main adversary, was in Greece, gathering a massive army and a powerful fleet. To cross the Adriatic and confront Pompey directly was risky. Pompey controlled the seas, and Caesar's fleet was small. Moreover, Pompey had significant forces still active in Spain, 7 legions commanded by his loyal legates. Caesar, with characteristic audacity, decided to deal with the Spanish threat first, quipping that he was going to fight an army without a general in Spain, and then return to fight a general without an army, Pompey in Greece. This was a calculated risk. Leaving Pompey unmolested in the east allowed him more time to build his strength, but securing Spain would protect Caesar's western flank and deprive Pompey of a crucial source of manpower and resources. In an astonishingly swift campaign of just 40 days in the summer of 49 BCE, Caesar, using brilliant maneuver and avoiding a costly pitched battle, surrounded and forced the surrender of the Pompeian legions at Alerta in Spain. His clemency was again on display. He disbanded the enemy legions, allowing the soldiers to return home or join his own army. He had secured Spain with minimal bloodshed. Meanwhile, Pompey was consolidating his forces in Greece. He had assembled a formidable army, perhaps 9 legions strong, with thousands of cavalry and auxiliary troops from allied eastern kings and potentates. His fleet, commanded by Caesar's old Optimate nemesis, Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, who would die of illness during the campaign, dominated the Adriatic. Many prominent senators, including Cato and Cicero, who had reluctantly joined Pompey, seeing him as the lesser of 2 evils, were in Pompey's camp. They represented, in their own eyes, the legitimate government of Rome in exile. In January 48 BCE, Caesar, in a daring winter crossing, managed to slip a part of his army, about 7 legions, but under strength, across the Adriatic from Brundisium to Epirus, eluding Pompey's naval patrols. Mark Antony, with the remaining troops, managed a similarly risky crossing a few months later, joining Caesar at Dyrrhachium, modern Durrës in Albania, a major Pompeian supply base. What followed was several months of complex maneuvering, sieges, and skirmishes around Dyrrhachium. Caesar, despite being outnumbered, attempted to blockade Pompey's larger army by building an extensive line of fortifications. It was an audacious gamble, and it almost backfired. Pompey, after enduring shortages, eventually broke through Caesar's lines, inflicting a significant defeat on Caesar and forcing him to retreat inland into Thessaly. This was Caesar's first major setback in the civil war. Pompey's camp was jubilant. Many of his Optimate allies urged him to pursue and crush Caesar immediately, or to return to Italy and reclaim Rome. Pompey, however, was more cautious, perhaps overconfident, or perhaps wary of Caesar's desperate genius. He decided to follow Caesar into Thessaly, seeking a decisive pitched battle on favorable ground. The two armies finally met on the plains of Pharsalus in central Greece on August 9, 48 BCE. This was to be the climactic showdown. Imagine you are there. It's a hot summer morning. The air is still, thick with dust and the nervous anticipation of battle. On one side, Pompey the Great, with perhaps 45,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry, his legions drawn up in traditional Roman fashion, his left flank anchored on the Enipeus River. He has superior numbers, especially in cavalry, which he places on his right flank under the command of Titus Labienus, Caesar's former second-in-command in Gaul, who had defected to Pompey at the start of the civil war, a bitter betrayal for Caesar. Pompey's plan is simple. Use his overwhelming cavalry superiority to outflank and rout Caesar's right wing, then roll up Caesar's infantry line from the rear. The Optimate senators in his camp are already squabbling over who will get Caesar's pontificate, who will get which confiscated property. Victory seems assured. On the other side, Caesar, with perhaps only 22,000 infantry, his legions seriously under strength after Dyrrhachium and the hard campaign, and about 1,000 cavalry. He is outnumbered more than 2 to 1. But his men are veterans, hardened by years of war in Gaul, fanatically loyal to him. Caesar, seeing Pompey's cavalry deployment, realizes the main threat. He thins out his main infantry lines to create a hidden fourth line of elite infantry cohorts, armed with *Pila*, javelins, positioned obliquely behind his own meager cavalry on his right flank. His instructions to this fourth line are crucial. When the Pompeian cavalry charges, they are not to throw their *Pila* as usual, but to use them as stabbing spears, aiming for the faces and eyes of the horsemen and their mounts. A brutal, unexpected tactic. The battle begins. Trumpets blare. The Pompeian legions advance slowly, cautiously, perhaps on Pompey's orders to conserve energy and let Caesar's men tire themselves by charging a longer distance. Caesar's legions, after a customary pause, charge forward with a roar. The lines clash. The metallic clang of sword on shield, the grunts of exertion, the screams of the wounded fill the air. Then, Labienus leads the Pompeian cavalry charge on Caesar's right. They easily overwhelm Caesar's outnumbered horsemen, who fall back as planned. Labienus's cavalry, confident of victory, surges forward to attack Caesar's exposed flank and rear. But suddenly, Caesar's hidden fourth line springs into action. They advance, their *Pila* held like spears, jabbing upwards at the faces of the charging cavalrymen. The shock and horror of this tactic, aiming for the face, a deeply personal and terrifying attack, throws the Pompeian cavalry into confusion and panic. Many are wealthy young Roman nobles, perhaps unaccustomed to such brutal, direct assault. They break and flee in disarray, leaving the Pompeian infantry's left flank exposed. Caesar seizes the moment. He orders his fourth line to wheel and attack the exposed Pompeian flank, while his main legions, sensing victory, press their attack on the front. The Pompeian legions, fighting bravely, begin to buckle under the pressure from front and flank. Their lines waver, then break. Panic spreads. The battle turns into a rout. Pompey the Great, the conqueror of the East, watches his army disintegrate from his camp. His confidence shatters. He reportedly retreats to his tent, a broken man, muttering in disbelief. As Caesar's men storm his camp, Pompey flees in disguise, his dreams of victory, his entire world, collapsing around him. The Battle of Pharsalus is a stunning, decisive victory for Caesar. Pompeian losses are catastrophic, perhaps 15,000 killed or wounded, and over 20,000 captured. Caesar's losses are remarkably light, perhaps only a few hundred. Caesar, as was his custom, shows clemency to the captured Pompeian officers and senators, pardoning many, including Marcus Junius Brutus, who would later be one of his assassins. This clemency, however, does not extend to the common soldiers who resist too fiercely. Pharsalus is the death knell of the Pompeian cause, though the war will drag on. Pompey himself, now a fugitive, flees to Egypt, hoping to find refuge with the young King Ptolemy XII, whose father Pompey had supported. But the Egyptian court, fearing Caesar's wrath and seeing an opportunity, makes a cynical calculation. As Pompey steps ashore at Pelusium, he is treacherously stabbed to death by Roman officers in Egyptian service. His head and signet ring are presented to Caesar when he arrives in Alexandria a few days later in pursuit. Caesar, far from being pleased, reportedly weeps at the sight of his former son-in-law and rival's severed head, perhaps out of genuine sorrow, perhaps out of disgust at the ignoble manner of his death, or perhaps it was a carefully calculated display of magnanimity. The gritty truth is likely a complex mix of all three. The collapse of the Pompeian forces after Pharsalus is swift. While Cato the Younger, Labienus, and other die-hard optimates rally the remnants of their forces in Africa and Spain for further resistance, the main threat is broken. Caesar, however, gets entangled in Egyptian dynastic politics in Alexandria, the Alexandrian War, supporting Cleopatra VI against her brother Ptolemy XI, a dalliance that will have far-reaching consequences. But the outcome of the civil war is no longer in doubt. Caesar, the man who crossed the Rubicon, has outmaneuvered, outfought, and outfought his opponents. His legions, his genius, and his calculated clemency have brought him to the brink of supreme power. The Republic, as a functioning system of shared governance, is effectively dead, its fate now resting in the hands of one man. The battlefields of Dyrrhachium and Pharsalus were not just military victories for Caesar, they were the funeral pyres of the old order. Chapter 3, Mopping Up. Thapsus, Munda, and the last stand of the Republic. The news of Pharsalus and Pompey's ignominious death in Egypt sent shockwaves through the Roman world, but it did not end the civil war. The Republic, or at least the idea of it fiercely cherished by the Optimate faction, was not yet ready to die. Pockets of determined resistance remained, led by men who would rather perish than submit to Caesar's dominance. For Caesar, the next few years, 48 to 45 BCE, would be a grim and bloody process of mopping up these remnants, a series of campaigns that would take him across Africa and Spain, further drenching Roman soil with Roman blood. While Caesar was embroiled in the Alexandrian War in Egypt, 48 to 47 BCE, where he famously installed Cleopatra VI on the throne and began his notorious affair with her, resulting in the birth of their son, Caesarion, the surviving Pompeian leaders were regrouping. Cato the Younger, Metellus Scipio, Pompey's father-in-law, who now took nominal command of the Pompeian forces, Titus Labienus, and Pompey's sons, Gnaeus and Sextus Pompeius, had gathered a formidable army in the Roman province of Africa, modern Tunisia. They had allied with King Juba of Numidia and controlled a powerful fleet. Africa became the new bastion of the Republican cause. After a swift and decisive campaign in Asia Minor against Pharnaces of Pontus, son of Mithridates, where Caesar achieved such a rapid victory at Zela that he famously reported it to Rome with the laconic phrase, *veni, vidi, vici*. I came, I saw, I conquered. He returned briefly to Rome to deal with mounting political and economic problems. His legions were becoming mutinous over lack of pay and discharge, and his policy of clemency was being strained by the continued resistance. He quelled the mutiny with his characteristic personal charisma and authority, then prepared for the African campaign. In late 47 BCE, Caesar landed in Africa. The campaign was difficult, his army initially outnumbered and his supply lines precarious. But Caesar's genius for improvisation and his soldiers' unwavering loyalty eventually turned the tide. The decisive battle came at Thapsus in April 46 BCE. It was a brutal, one-sided slaughter. Caesar's veteran legions, perhaps angered by the prolonged resistance or specifically ordered to take no prisoners, annihilated the Pompeian Republican forces. Metellus Scipio and King Juba were killed. Thousands of Republican soldiers perished. Caesar himself, according to some sources, suffered an epileptic seizure during or just before the battle, but his lieutenants carried the day. The aftermath of Thapsus was grim. Caesar, his patience perhaps wearing thin, was less clement than before. Many prominent Republican leaders who were captured were executed. The most poignant end was that of Marcus Porcius Cato the Younger. After the defeat at Thapsus, Cato retreated to the city of Utica. Realizing the Republican cause was lost in Africa, and determined not to live under Caesar's rule or accept his pardon, which he viewed as an intolerable assertion of superior authority, Cato committed suicide. His death was a deliberate act of stoic defiance, a final tragic protest against tyranny. He reportedly spent his last evening reading Plato's Phaedo on the immortality of the soul, then calmly disemboweled himself with his sword. When his attendants found him and tried to stitch up the wound, he tore it open again, ensuring his own death. Cato's suicide became a potent symbol for later generations of Romans who opposed imperial rule, a martyr for the lost cause of republican liberty. He was the unyielding conscience of a dying republic. With Africa subdued, Caesar returned to Rome in triumph in the summer of 46 BCE. He celebrated an unprecedented 4 triumphs over 4 days for Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Africa. Pointedly, the African triumph was officially over King Juba, not over Roman citizens, to maintain the fiction that he wasn't celebrating victories in a civil war. The city was treated to lavish games, public banquets, and distributions of money. Caesar was now heaped with honors by a cowed and compliant Senate. He was made dictator for 10 years, then dictator for life, dictator perpetua *. He was granted the title Pater Patriae *, father of the fatherland. His statue was placed among those of the kings on the Capitoline Hill, and another in the temple of Quirinus, the deified Romulus, with the inscription to the invincible god. The line between man and monarch, man and god, was becoming dangerously blurred. But the civil war was still not entirely over. Pompey's sons Gnaeus and Sextus Pompeius, along with Titus Labienus, had escaped from Africa and raised a new army in Spain, rallying die-hard Pompeians and disaffected locals. They'd posed a final desperate challenge to Caesar's supremacy. In late 46 BCE, Caesar was forced to march to Spain yet again. The Spanish campaign was the bitterest and most dangerous of all. The Pompeians fought with the courage of despair, and Caesar himself admitted he was fighting not just for victory, but for his very life. The final decisive battle took place at Munda in southern Spain on March 17, 45 BCE. It was an incredibly hard-fought and bloody affair. Caesar's legions, facing determined resistance, began to waver. Caesar himself, seeing the danger, plunged into the thick of the fighting, shaming his men into holding their ground. Legend says he later remarked that he had often fought for victory, but at Munda he had fought for his life. Eventually, Caesar's veterans broke the Pompeian lines. The slaughter was immense. Titus Labienus and Gnaeus Pompeius, the elder son, were killed. Sextus Pompeius alone managed to escape, to become a pirate king and a thorn in the side of Caesar's successors for years to come. Munda was the end. The last organized republican army was destroyed. Caesar returned to Rome in October 45 BCE, the undisputed master of the Roman world. There were no more armies to fight, no more rivals to challenge his authority. He was supreme, a monarch in all but name, though he pointedly refused the title of *rex* king when it was offered to him, knowing the deep Roman aversion to that word. But his victory had come at a terrible cost. The Roman Republic, as a system of shaded governance, was dead. Its elite had been decimated by years of civil war and proscriptions. Its institutions, the Senate, the popular assemblies, the magistracies, were now mere rubber stamps for Caesar's will. He embarked on a vast program of reforms, reforming the calendar, the Julian calendar, which, with minor modifications, we still use today, founding colonies for his veterans and the urban poor, reorganizing provincial administration, initiating vast public building projects in Rome. He was, in many ways, a benevolent and far-sighted autocrat. But for a significant segment of the old Roman aristocracy, his rule, however efficient, was an intolerable tyranny. They saw him as the destroyer of their ancestral liberties, the man who had snuffed out the *res publica*. They remembered Cato's defiance. And as Caesar's power grew ever more absolute, as honors were heaped upon him that seemed to elevate him above mortal status, the whispers of conspiracy began. The symphony of ruin had reached its climax with Caesar's victories, but a final bloody coda was yet to be played, a coda that would be written on the Ides of March. End of Book IV, Crossing the Rubicon. Book V, The Ides of March and the Rise of Augustus, A New Order from the Ashes. Introduction to Book V. Gaius Julius Caesar stood astride the Roman world like a colossus. Munda had extinguished the last embers of organized republican resistance. He was dictator for life, Pontifex Maximus, Pater Patria, showered with honors that blurred the line between man and deity. He was reforming the calendar, reorganizing the state, planning vast new campaigns to Parthia to avenge Crassus and conquer Dacia. Rome, exhausted by decades of civil strife, seemed to lie compliant at his feet. The Republic, that ancient, battered edifice, was now little more than a facade, its inner chambers occupied by a single, all-powerful master. But beneath the surface of apparent stability, resentment smoldered. For a dedicated core of Roman aristocrats, men steeped in the traditions of republican liberty, Caesar's untrammeled power was an affront, a tyranny that had to be ended. They saw themselves not as murderers, but as tyrannicides, patriots striking a blow for freedom in the mold of Lucius Junius Brutus, the legendary founder of the Republic, who had overthrown the last king of Rome. Their conspiracy, born of fear, idealism, personal grievances, and genuine republican fervor, would culminate in one of history's most infamous assassinations. The death of Caesar, however, would not restore the republic they dreamed of. Instead, it would plunge Rome into another, even more convulsive round of civil war, a chaotic power struggle between Caesar's ambitious lieutenants and his cunning young heir. From the blood-soaked floor of the Senate House on the Ides of March, a new order would eventually, agonizingly, emerge. The Republic would receive its final fatal wounds, and from its ashes would rise the Roman Empire, under the cautious, calculating, and ultimately triumphant hand of Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, soon to be known as Augustus. The Symphony of Ruin was about to play its chaotic, tragic finale before giving way to a new imperial theme. Chapter 1. The Tyrannicides, Beware the Ides of March. Early 44 BCE. Rome is a city of outward calm but simmering unease. Caesar is at the apex of his power. He plans a major military campaign against the Parthians, scheduled to depart in a few days. He is confident, perhaps overly so, dismissive of warnings about his safety. He has disbanded his loyal Spanish bodyguard, claiming he would rather die once by treachery than live in constant fear. A fatal miscalculation. For months, a conspiracy has been coalescing against him. It's a surprisingly diverse group, numbering perhaps 60 or more senators, a mix of former Pompeians whom Caesar had pardoned, like Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, the ringleaders, and some of his own former supporters who had become disillusioned or fearful of his increasingly monarchical tendencies. Their motives are complex. Some, like Brutus, who claimed descent from the original Brutus, the Kingslayer, and felt a heavy ancestral burden, were driven by genuine, if perhaps naive, republican idealism. They truly believed that by killing the tyrant, they could magically restore the free republic. Others, like Cassius, may have been motivated more by personal ambition, resentment at being overshadowed by Caesar, or fear of his absolute power. Some were simply settling old scores or protecting their own status. Brutus is the key figure, the conscience of the conspiracy. He is a respected intellectual, a student of philosophy, a man known for his integrity. Caesar had shown him great favor, pardoning him after Pharsalus, appointing him governor of Cisalpine Gaul and then praetor. Caesar reportedly loved Brutus's mother, Servilia, who had been Caesar's longtime mistress, and there were even rumors, almost certainly false, that Brutus was Caesar's illegitimate son. Caesar's fondness for Brutus makes his betrayal all the more poignant or all the more damning, depending on one's perspective. Cassius is a more practical, perhaps more cynical, soldier and politician, driven by a fierce hatred of tyranny in any form. Together, they recruit others, binding them with oaths of secrecy. The conspirators, calling themselves the *Liberators Liberators, plan to strike on the Ides of March, March 15, 44 BCE. The Senate is scheduled to meet that day in the Curia of Pompey, part of Pompey's theater complex, as the old Curia Hostilia, burned down by Clodius's mob, was still being rebuilt as the Curia Julia by Caesar. This location is symbolic. Caesar, the man who had defeated Pompey, would be struck down at the foot of his rival's statue. The plan is to surround Caesar during the Senate session and stab him to death. They choose not to harm Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal co-consul and right-hand man, a decision Brutus insists upon against Cassius's advice, believing that their act must be seen as a targeted tyrannicide, not a bloody coup or a new round of prescriptions. This too will prove to be a fatal miscalculation. The days leading up to the Ides are filled with ominous portents, or so later historians would claim. Strange lights in the sky, nightmares, sacrificial animals found to have no heart. Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, begs him not to attend the Senate, having dreamed of his murder. A soothsayer, Spurina, had famously warned Caesar to beware the Ides of March. On the morning of the 15th, Caesar, reportedly feeling unwell and unsettled by Calpurnia's fears, initially decides to stay home. But Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, another Brutus, one of Caesar's trusted generals, and, ironically, also a conspirator, persuades him to attend, arguing that he would offend the senators who had gathered to honor him and to vote on a proposal, perhaps deliberately planted as bait, to grant him the title of king outside of Italy for the Parthian campaign. Caesar sets out for the Curia of Pompey. On his way, he allegedly sees Spurina and remarks cheerfully, "The Ides of March have come," to which Spurina replies, "Aye, Caesar, but not yet gone." He is handed a scroll by a well-wisher, Artemidorus, detailing the conspiracy, but in the press of petitioners and the bustle of the occasion, Caesar does not read it, tucking it away with other documents. Fate, it seems, is playing its hand. Caesar enters the Senate house. The conspirators are waiting, daggers, pujones, concealed beneath their togas. About 200 senators are present, most unaware of the plot. As Caesar takes his seat, the conspirators crowd around him, feigning to present a petition on behalf of Tilius Cimber's exiled brother. Cimber grabs Caesar's toga, pulling it from his shoulders, the signal. Publius Servilius Casca Longus strikes the first blow, a glancing wound to Caesar's neck or shoulder. Caesar, surprised, cries out in Latin, "Villain Casca, what are you doing?" and reportedly stabs Casca in the arm with his stylus asterisk, a writing instrument. But then the others close in, a frenzy of flashing daggers. Caesar tries to defend himself, to push through them, but he is surrounded, outnumbered. He sees Marcus Junius Brutus among his attackers. This is the moment of ultimate betrayal. According to Suetonius, Caesar's last words, uttered in Greek as he saw Brutus approach with a dagger, were *Kaisu, teknon *. You too, my child/son. Whether he actually said this, or if it's a later dramatic invention, it captures the horror of that moment. Realizing all is lost, Caesar pulls his toga over his head, partly to cover his face in death, partly, perhaps, in a final gesture of dignity, refusing to let his assassins see his dying agony. He falls, bleeding profusely from 23 stab wounds, though only one, a chest wound, was deemed fatal by the physician who later examined the body. He collapses at the foot of Pompey's statue, which is spattered with his blood. Gaius Julius Caesar, conqueror of Gaul, victor of the civil wars, dictator for life, lies dead on the floor of a Senate house built by his defeated rival. The Curia erupts in chaos. The non-conspiring senators, terrified, flee. The liberators, their daggers dripping with Caesar's blood, raise their weapons and cry out, "Liberty!" And the tyrant is dead. Brutus tries to address the remaining senators, to explain their actions, but no one is listening. They emerge from the Curia, intending to address the people in the Forum, to proclaim the restoration of the Republic. But the city is gripped by fear and confusion. The Forum is deserted. Shops are shuttered. Citizens lock themselves in their homes, unsure what has happened, fearing a new round of proscriptions or civil war. The liberators, their triumphant moment falling flat, retreat to the Capitoline Hill for safety, a group of idealistic assassins who have killed a tyrant but have no clear plan for what comes next. They have removed the head of the state, but the body politic is still deeply diseased. Caesar is dead, but Caesarism, the system of one-man rule he embodied, is far from over. His ghost and his legacy will dominate Rome for years to come. The Ides of March, intended to restore the Republic, has instead unleashed a new maelstrom of chaos. Chapter 2. The Aftermath. Antony, Octavian, and the second triumvirate ***. Caesar's blood is still wet on the paving stones of Pompey's Curia, but the liberators' dream of an immediate, spontaneous restoration of the Republic quickly evaporates. Rome is not jubilant. It is stunned, fearful, and dangerously rudderless. Brutus and Cassius, for all their idealistic fervor, have made a critical error. They had a plan to kill Caesar, but no coherent plan for governing Rome afterwards. They assumed the Senate and the people would rally to their cause. They were wrong. In the immediate power vacuum, two key figures emerge from Caesar's camp. First, Mark Antony, Marcus Antonius. Caesar's loyal co-consul, a proven general, a charismatic, if somewhat dissolute, figure, and a skilled political operator. Antony, initially fearing for his own life, hides, but quickly realizes he is the most powerful legitimate authority left in Rome. He seizes Caesar's papers and his private treasury, positioning himself as Caesar's political heir. Second, and initially underestimated by everyone, is Gaius Octavius Thurinus, Caesar's grandnephew. Octavius, a sickly but intellectually sharp and ruthlessly ambitious youth of 18, is away in Apollonia, in modern Albania, with Caesar's legions, preparing for the Parthian campaign, when he hears of Caesar's assassination. He also learns something astonishing. Caesar, in his will, has posthumously adopted him as his son and named him his principal heir, bequeathing him the potent name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, Octavian, and 3/4 of his vast fortune. Ignoring the advice of older, more cautious counselors, Octavian immediately sails for Italy, determined to claim his inheritance, both the money and, more importantly, the name and political legacy of Caesar. Back in Rome, a tense standoff unfolds. Antony convenes the Senate. A compromise is brokered, largely by Cicero, who is returned to the political fray, hoping to guide the state back to republican normalcy. Caesar's acts and appointments are ratified to avoid administrative chaos and to appease his veterans, but the liberators are granted amnesty. It's an uneasy truce, satisfying no one. The turning point comes at Caesar's public funeral. Antony, a masterful orator, delivers a funeral eulogy in the Forum that is a masterpiece of political theater. He begins by seemingly praising Caesar's assassins, acknowledging their stated motives. But then he reads Caesar's will, which includes generous bequests to the Roman people, gardens by the Tiber, a sum of money for every citizen. He displays Caesar's bloody toga, pointing out the rents made by the daggers, naming some of the assassins, men Caesar had pardoned and honored. He perhaps even displays a lifelike wax effigy of Caesar showing his wounds. The crowd, already moved by Caesar's generosity, is whipped into a frenzy of grief and rage against the liberators. Riots erupt. The homes of Brutus and Cassius are attacked. The liberators are forced to flee Rome, their hopes of popular acclaim shattered. Antony is now the dominant figure in the city, backed by Caesar's angry veterans and the inflamed populace. But then Octavian arrives in Italy, landing at Brundisium. He is a slight, unimpressive youth, but he carries the magical name Caesar. He begins to rally support among Caesar's veterans, promising them the legacy Caesar had bequeathed, which Antony is slow to pay out. He uses his own inherited wealth and borrows heavily to raise a private army. Antony, initially dismissive of this boy, soon realizes he has a serious rival for Caesar's legacy. The political situation becomes incredibly complex and volatile. Cicero, seeing Antony as the new tyrant, champions Octavian, hoping to use the boy Caesar to destroy Antony and then discard him, restoring the Senate's authority. He delivers a series of blistering speeches against Antony in the Senate, the Philippics named after Demosthenes' speeches against Philip of Macedon, masterpieces of invective that will ultimately cost Cicero his life. War soon breaks out between Antony, who has secured for himself Caesar's old province of Gaul, and the Senate, which, prodded by Cicero, declares Antony a public enemy. Octavian, with his private army and the backing of some senatorial legions, fights alongside the consular armies against Antony at the Battle of Modena, in early 43 BCE. Antony is defeated and forced to retreat across the Alps. Both consuls are killed in the fighting, conveniently leaving Octavian as the most powerful general in Italy. Octavian, having served the Senate's purpose, now shows his true colors. He marches on Rome with his legions and demands the consulship. The Senate, terrified and powerless, complies. Octavian, at the age of just 19, becomes consul. He then does something shocking. He has Caesar's assassins formally condemned and outlawed, and he opens negotiations with his erstwhile enemy, Mark Antony. In November 43 BCE, near Bologna, Octavian, Antony, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, a powerful Caesarian general who controlled legions in Spain and Gaul, and son of the Lepidus who had challenged Sulla's constitution, meet on a small island in a river. There, they form the Second Triumvirate. Unlike the First Triumvirate, which was a private pact, this one is a legally constituted 5-year dictatorship. Triumviri rei publica constituende triumvirs for the organization of the republic. They carve up the Roman world among themselves, with Antony taking the wealthy east, Octavian much of the west, including Italy, though this was problematic, and Lepidus Africa. Their first act as triumvirs is to unleash a new, horrific wave of proscriptions, far more brutal and extensive than even Sulla's. Their aims are threefold: to eliminate their political enemies, to raise money to pay their massive armies, they command over 40 legions between them, and to avenge Caesar. Thousands are proscribed: senators, equestrians, wealthy citizens. Property is confiscated. A reign of terror descends upon Italy. Among the most prominent victims is Marcus Tullius Cicero. Antony, who hates Cicero for the Philippic's asterisk, insists on his inclusion in the lists despite Octavian's reported reluctance, though Octavian ultimately acquiesces, a mark of his cold pragmatism. Cicero attempts to flee but is caught by Antony's soldiers near his villa at Formia in December 43 BCE. He meets his end with courage, baring his neck to the executioner. His head and hands, the hands that wrote the Philippic's asterisk, are cut off and displayed by Antony's order on the rostra in the Roman Forum, the very place where Cicero had so often swayed the Roman people with his eloquence. It is a gruesome symbol of the death of free speech and the brutal realities of triumviral rule. With Italy cowed and their enemies eliminated or in flight, the triumvirs turned their attention to the east. Brutus and Cassius, the leading liberators, have gathered a formidable army in Macedonia and Asia Minor, the last hope of the Republican cause. The final showdown is inevitable. The Republic is bleeding from 1,000 wounds, its fate to be decided once again on the battlefield by Roman legions led by Roman generals. The age of the triumvirs will be even bloodier than what came before. Chapter 3. Philippi and the death of the Republic's last champions. The autumn of 42 BCE. The plains of Philippi in Macedonia, a region steeped in the history of Alexander the Great and his father Philip Ui, are about to become the graveyard of the Roman Republic's last significant defenders. On one side stand Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, the chief assassins of Julius Caesar, commanding an army of perhaps 17 to 19 legions, composed of Roman veterans, eastern provincials, and mercenaries. They are well supplied, their coffers filled from the plundered wealth of Asia Minor, and they control a strong fleet that harasses the triumvir's supply lines. Their camp is a city on the move, filled with Roman senators and equestrians who still cling to the dream of a restored republic. They are fighting for an ideal, for libertas but also for their own survival, knowing that defeat means certain death. On the other side are Mark Antony and Octavian, the triumvirs, commanding a slightly larger force of around 19 to 21 legions. These are Caesar's hardened veterans, augmented by new recruits, all eager to avenge their murdered leader and secure the rewards of victory. Antony is the experienced military commander here, a charismatic and inspiring general. Octavian, still young and often in poor health, is less of a field commander, but his presence, bearing the name Caesar, is a potent symbol for the troops. Their supply situation is precarious, reliant on a long and vulnerable line back to Italy. They need a quick, decisive victory. The campaign around Philippi unfolds in 2 distinct battles, fought about 3 weeks apart. The first battle of Philippi, early October 42 BCE. The armies are encamped on opposite sides of the Via Egnatia, the main Roman road through Macedonia. Brutus commands the Republican right wing, Cassius the left. Antony faces Cassius, Octavian faces Brutus. The battle begins with an impetuous charge by Brutus's wing, which overwhelms Octavian's legions, captures his camp, and sends Octavian himself fleeing. Some accounts say he was ill and not even on the field, others that he narrowly escaped. It looks like a Republican victory on that flank. However, on the other flank, Antony, with his characteristic battlefield aggression, launches a fierce assault on Cassius's lines. Cassius's men are pushed back. Antony's troops manage to penetrate Cassius's camp. Cassius, misinformed about the success on Brutus's wing, perhaps due to dust obscuring the battlefield or faulty reconnaissance, sees his own camp overrun and believes all is lost. In despair, and reportedly fearing capture, Cassius orders his freedman, Pindarus, to kill him. Pindarus obeys, then disappears. Cassius, the pragmatic, cynical, but fiercely anti-tyrannical general, is dead. When Brutus, having rallied his victorious troops, learns of Cassius's death and the defeat of the left wing, he is devastated. He reportedly calls Cassius the last of the Romans. The first battle is a confused, bloody draw, with both sides suffering heavy losses, but the Republicans have lost one of their key leaders and a significant portion of their army. The Second Battle of Philippi, late October 42 BCE. For about 3 weeks, the armies face each other in a tense standoff. Brutus is reluctant to risk another pitched battle, preferring to use his superior naval power to cut off the triumvir's supplies and wear them down. But his officers and soldiers, buoyed by their earlier success on his wing and impatient for a decisive outcome, pressure him into fighting. It's a fatal misjudgment. Antony, whose supply situation is indeed becoming critical, provokes Brutus into battle. The fighting is fierce, brutal. Roman legionaries on both sides, men who should have been comrades, slaughter each other with grim determination. For a time, the outcome hangs in the balance. But Antony's generalship and the discipline of his Caesarian veterans eventually prevail. Brutus's lines are broken, his army collapses into a rout. Brutus manages to escape with a remnant of his forces into the nearby hills, but he knows the Republican cause is utterly lost. Surrounded, with no hope of relief, he decides to follow Cassius's example. On the night of the battle, or the following day, Marcus Junius Brutus, the noblest Roman of them all, at least in Shakespeare's famous phrase, and in the eyes of some of his contemporaries, the man who killed his benefactor Caesar in the name of liberty, asks one of his companions, Strato, to hold his sword while he runs upon it. Brutus dies, a tragic hero, a failed idealist, the last great champion of a dying republic. Antony, finding Brutus's body, reportedly treats it with respect, covering it with his own purple cloak and ordering it an honorable cremation. He recognizes, perhaps, the nobility of Brutus's motives, even if he fought against him. Octavian, however, is said to have been less magnanimous, perhaps even having Brutus's head sent to Rome to be thrown at the foot of Caesar's statue, though this is disputed. The battles of Philippi are the death knell of the Republican cause. With Brutus and Cassius dead, and their armies annihilated or surrendered, there is no organized Republican force left to challenge the triumvirs. Many prominent Republicans who survived the battle commit suicide rather than fall into the triumvir's hands. Others are captured and executed. A few, like the naval commander Sextus Pompeius, Pompey the Great's surviving son, escape to continue a more piratical resistance. The triumvirs are now the undisputed masters of the Roman world. But their victory at Philippi, while eliminating their common enemies, also sows the seeds of their own future conflict. With the Republicans gone, the inherent rivalries and ambitions of Antony and Octavian, the two dominant figures in the triumvirate, Lepidus is increasingly a junior, marginalized partner, will inevitably come to the fore. The Republic is dead, its champions buried in Macedonian soil. What will replace it is still uncertain, but it will be forged in the crucible of the triumvir's own struggle for ultimate supremacy. The final act of the Republic's demise is about to begin. Chapter 4, Antony and Cleopatra. The East versus West collision ****. With the ghosts of Brutus and Cassius laid to rest at Philippi, the second triumvirate, Antony, Octavian, and the increasingly sidelined Lepidus stands supreme. but the bonds of their alliance, forged in the need to avenge Caesar and eliminate common enemies, soon begin to fray under the immense pressure of their individual ambitions and the vast, complex Roman world they now rule. A new division of the empire is agreed upon. Antony, as the senior partner and victor of Philippi, takes the wealthy, glamorous East with the task of reorganizing the provinces, raising revenue, and preparing for the long-delayed Parthian War. Octavian gets the difficult West, including Italy, with the unenviable jobs of settling tens of thousands of demobilized, mutinous veterans, which means more land confiscations and social unrest in Italy, and dealing with the ongoing naval threat from Sextus Pompeius, who has established a piratical kingdom in Sicily and Sardinia, choking Rome's grain supply. Lepidus is fobbed off with Africa. Antony heads east, and it is here that he encounters a figure who will change his destiny and the course of Roman history. Cleopatra Voai, Queen of Egypt. They had met before, briefly, when Caesar was in Egypt. Now, in 41 BCE, Antony summons Cleopatra to Tarsus in Cilicia, modern Turkey, to answer charges that she had aided Cassius. Cleopatra, a shrewd politician and a woman of immense charm and intellect, not just beauty, as popular legend often portrays her, arrives in spectacular fashion, sailing up the Cydnus River on a magnificent gilded barge, dressed as the goddess Venus, surrounded by attendants disguised as Cupids and Nereids. The display is designed to captivate the Roman general, who himself fancied himself a new Dionysus. Antony, a man known for his love of pleasure, luxury, and grand gestures, is utterly enthralled. He not only absolves Cleopatra of the charges, but also spends the winter of 41 to 40 BCE with her in Alexandria, a winter of legendary opulence and debauchery. Cleopatra, for her part, sees in Antony a powerful Roman protector for her kingdom and a potential partner in her own ambitions to restore the glory of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Their political alliance quickly becomes a passionate love affair. She bears him twin children, Alexander Helios, sun, and Cleopatra Selene, moon. While Antony is dallying in Egypt, Octavian is facing immense difficulties in Italy. The land confiscations for his veterans lead to widespread unrest and even armed rebellion, notably the Perizene War, 41 to 40 BCE, led by Antony's brother Lucius Antonius and Antony's ambitious wife, Fulvia. Octavian, showing his characteristic ruthlessness, crushes the revolt, besieging and capturing Perugia, and making an example of its leading citizens. Fulvia and Lucius are spared. Fulvia dies soon after in Greece, but the war further strains relations between Octavian and Antony, who suspects Octavian of using the crisis to consolidate his own power in Italy. Tensions escalate to the point where another civil war between the two triumvirs seems imminent. However, their soldiers, weary of fighting fellow Romans, pressure them to reconcile. In 40 BCE, at the Treaty of Brundisium, Antony and Octavian patch up their differences. Antony's control over the east is reaffirmed, Octavian's over the west. To seal the pact, Antony, whose wife Fulvia has conveniently died, agrees to marry Octavian's virtuous and respected elder sister, Octavia. This marriage is intended to be a new bond holding the two dynasts together, much like Julia's marriage to Pompey had once linked Caesar and Pompey. For a time, it seems to work. Octavia is a devoted wife and a skilled diplomat, often mediating between her husband and her brother. Antony, with Octavia, returns to the east, focusing on preparations for his long-planned Parthian campaign. He needs Parthian gold and glory to bolster his position against the increasingly powerful Octavian. But his obsession with Cleopatra remains. He eventually sends the pregnant Octavia back to Rome around 37 BCE and resumes his relationship with the Egyptian queen, publicly acknowledging their children and marrying her according to Egyptian rites. Though this marriage was not recognized under Roman law, as he was still married to Octavia. This Eastern marriage and his increasingly Oriental lifestyle become powerful propaganda weapons for Octavian in Rome. Antony's Parthian campaign, 36 BCE, is a disaster. He invades Armenia and then Media Atropatene, part of modern Iran, but suffers heavy losses due to harsh weather, difficult terrain, and Parthian harassment of his supply lines. He is forced into a humiliating retreat, losing perhaps a third of his army. It's a far cry from Caesar's Gallic triumphs, and it severely damages Antony's military prestige. Despite this setback, Antony, back in Alexandria with Cleopatra, stages a bizarre triumphal celebration known as the Donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE. In a lavish public ceremony, Antony and Cleopatra, dressed as Dionysus Osiris and Isis Venus, sit on golden thrones. Antony declares Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, to be Caesar's true son and heir, a direct challenge to Octavian's legitimacy. He then donates vast eastern territories, many of which were not even fully under Roman control, to Cleopatra and their children, proclaiming them kings and queens, with Cleopatra hailed as Queen of Kings. News of the donations of Alexandria, skillfully amplified by Octavian's propaganda machine in Rome, causes outrage. Octavian paints Antony as a man who has gone native, bewitched by an Oriental sorceress, betraying Roman interests, and aiming to establish a new Hellenistic monarchy in the east with Alexandria as its capital, thereby dismembering the Roman Empire. Antony's will, which Octavian illegally seizes from the Vestal Virgins in Rome and reads aloud to the Senate, reportedly confirms his eastern intentions and his desire to be buried in Alexandria with Cleopatra. This is the final nail in Antony's political coffin in Rome. The Senate, now firmly under Octavian's control, Lepidus had been stripped of his triumviral powers and forced into retirement in 36 BCE after trying to challenge Octavian in Sicily, declares war not on Antony to avoid the appearance of another civil war, but on Cleopatra. It's a transparent fiction. Everyone knows this is the final showdown between Octavian, champion of the West and Roman tradition, and Antony, the perceived traitor who has succumbed to Eastern decadence. The fate of the Roman world will be decided by one last, massive naval battle. The collision between East and West, between Antony and Octavian, is about to reach its climax. The symphony of ruin is building to its final thunderous chord. Chapter 5, Actium and the Augustan Dawn. The empire is born The year is 31 BCE. The waters off the promontory of Actium on the western coast of Greece are about to witness the final cataclysmic naval battle that will determine the fate of the Roman world. On one side, Mark Antony and Cleopatra command a large fleet, perhaps 500 warships, many of them large, heavily armed quinqueremes and even larger vessels, carrying around 70,000 legionaries and numerous sailors and rowers. Their ships are impressive, but perhaps less maneuverable. Their crews are a mix of Romans, Egyptians, and other Eastern peoples, their morale possibly undermined by Antony's recent setbacks and Octavian's relentless propaganda. They are blockaded in the Ambracian Gulf by Octavian's fleet. On the other side, Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant admiral, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, a man of humble origins but immense military talent. Agrippa's fleet is smaller in number, perhaps around 400 ships, but they are generally lighter, faster, more agile Liburnian galleys, crewed by experienced Roman sailors and marines, their morale high. Agrippa has already secured key strategic points along the Greek coast, tightening the noose around Antony's forces. Antony's situation is desperate. His land army, cooped up in malarial swamps around Actium, is suffering from disease and desertions. His supply lines are cut. He decides he must break out with his fleet, try to reach Egypt, and regroup. Cleopatra, with her treasure-laden squadron, is to accompany him. The Battle of Actium, fought on September 2, 31 BCE, is less a heroic clash of titans and more confused, somewhat anticlimactic, but ultimately decisive engagement. As Antony's fleet emerges from the Gulf, Agrippa's ships engage them. The fighting is fierce in places, with Agrippa's lighter vessels darting around Antony's heavier warships, using ramming tactics and missile fire, including fire pots launched by catapults. At a critical moment in the battle, with the outcome still uncertain, Cleopatra, perhaps seeing an opportunity or perhaps panicking, hoists sail with her squadron of 60 Egyptian ships and flees southward towards Egypt. Antony, seeing her depart, makes a fateful decision. He abandons his fighting fleet, transfers to a smaller, faster vessel, and follows Cleopatra, leaving his vast army and the bulk of his navy to their fate. Whether this was a pre-arranged plan for a strategic withdrawal or a catastrophic failure of leadership on Antony's part is still debated, but the effect on his remaining forces is devastating. Demoralized by their commander's flight, their resistance crumbles. Many ships are burned or sunk, some surrender. Antony's land army, leaderless and abandoned, surrenders to Octavian a week later. Actium is a comprehensive victory for Octavian. Antony and Cleopatra escape to Alexandria, but their cause is lost. Their power base has evaporated. Their remaining allies desert them. Octavian, now the undisputed master of the Roman world, prepares to invade Egypt. In the summer of 30 BCE, Octavian's legions close in on Alexandria. Antony, receiving a false report that Cleopatra has committed suicide, falls on his own sword. Mortally wounded, he is carried to Cleopatra's mausoleum, where she has barricaded herself and dies in her arms. A tragic, almost operatic end for the once mighty general. Cleopatra, now a captive, tries to negotiate with Octavian, perhaps hoping to secure her kingdom for her children, or even to exert her legendary charm on this new Roman master. But Octavian is no Caesar, no Antony to be swayed by her allure. He is cold, calculating, and determined. He intends to parade her in his triumph in Rome, a symbol of his victory over the decadent East. Cleopatra, proud and defiant to the end, unwilling to suffer such humiliation, chooses suicide. According to the famous legend, she has an ast, a venomous Egyptian cobra, smuggled to her in a basket of figs and dies from its bite, a queen's death. Her son by Caesar, Caesarion, whom Octavian sees as a potential rival, is hunted down and executed. 2 Caesars are one too many, Octavian reportedly remarked. Antony and Cleopatra's other children are spared and raised by Antony's estranged Roman wife, Octavia, in a bizarre twist of fate. With the deaths of Antony and Cleopatra and the annexation of Egypt as a Roman province, its immense wealth now flowing directly into Octavian's personal treasury, the last of the civil wars is finally over. Decades of bloodshed from the Gracchi to Actium have come to an end. Octavian, at the age of 33, stands alone, the sole, unchallenged ruler of a vast empire that stretches from Britain to Syria, from Spain to the Nile. But what now? Will he declare himself king? Will he follow Sulla's example and become dictator for life, only to retire? Octavian is far more astute, more patient than his predecessors. He knows that Rome, while weary of war, is still deeply suspicious of overt monarchy. He understands the power of republican forms, even if their substance is gone. Over the next few years, Octavian, with incredible political skill, patience, and a carefully crafted image, orchestrates what becomes known as the Restoration of the Republic. In 27 BCE, in a masterful piece of political theater, he appears before the Senate and formally renounces his extraordinary powers, returning authority to the Senate and people of Rome, Senatus Populusque Romanus SP. The grateful Senate, in return, and undoubtedly at his prompting, requests him to retain control of key provinces, those with the most legions, like Spain, Gaul, and Syria, grants him the new honorific title of Augustus, the Revered, a name with religious connotations but no monarchical ones, and names him Princeps first citizen or first man of the Senate. He also retains consular power and the authority of a tribune of the plebs, tribunician potestas, which gives him sacrosanctity, the power to veto, and the ability to convene the Senate and assemblies. It is a brilliant charade, a constitutional settlement that preserves the outward forms of the Republic, Senate, consuls, assemblies, while concentrating real power in the hands of one man, Augustus. He is not a king, not a dictator, but the Princeps the guiding hand of the state, the restorer of peace and order. The Pax Romana Roman peace, an era of unprecedented stability and prosperity for the Mediterranean world, begins under his rule. The Roman Republic, born some 500 years earlier with the overthrow of kings, is dead. It died not on a single day, but through a century of escalating political violence, selfish ambition, systemic failure, and the rise of overpowerful individuals who tore it apart in their struggle for dominance. From its ashes, under the careful, often ruthless, but ultimately effective guidance of Augustus, the Roman Empire is born. The symphony of ruin has finally ended. A new imperial symphony, with Augustus as its first conductor, is about to begin, a symphony that will play for centuries. The gritty truth is that the Republic, for all its ideals, had proven incapable of managing its own success, its own power, and its own most ambitious sons. Its collapse was perhaps inevitable, a tragic but necessary prelude to a new, more stable, if more autocratic world order. *** overall conclusion for the entire work ***. And so, the curtain falls on the Roman Republic. Its demise was not a swift execution, but a slow, agonizing dissolution, a century-long spectacle of ambition, greed, idealism, and bloodshed. We have journeyed from the hopeful, doomed reforms of the Gracchi brothers, who first dared to challenge the entrenched power of the senatorial elite, to the blood-soaked battlefields where Roman legions slaughtered Roman legions under Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Caesar. We have witnessed the rise of the client army, the subversion of sacred traditions, the normalization of political violence, and the cynical machinations of men who placed personal power above the common good. The Republic, born from the rejection of monarchy, ironically succumbed to it in all but name. Its institutions, designed to prevent the concentration of power, were systematically dismantled or hollowed out by the very men they were meant to constrain. The most maiorum asterisk, the revered way of the ancestors, became a hollow catchphrase, invoked even as it was being trampled underfoot. The gritty truth is that the Republic's vast expansion, its immense wealth, and the opportunities for unparalleled personal glory it offered proved too tempting for its most capable and ambitious citizens. They became too big for the system to handle. The story of the Republic's fall is a human story, filled with figures of towering intellect, military genius, and charismatic appeal. Marius, the new man; Sulla, the ruthless restorer; Pompey, the conquering hero; Crassus, the master of wealth; Cicero, the eloquent defender of a dying ideal; Cato, the stoic martyr; Caesar, the brilliant destroyer and builder; Antony, the flawed titan; and finally, Augustus, the cold, calculating architect of a new age. They were not simply heroes or villains, but complex individuals driven by a potent cocktail of ambition, patriotism, however defined, fear, and self-interest. Their choices, their rivalries, their triumphs, and their failures shaped the destiny of the Western world. What enduring lessons can we draw from this grand, tragic narrative? Perhaps that no political system, however well designed, is immune to the corrosive effects of extreme inequality, unchecked ambition, and the erosion of shared norms and values. That the line between a republic and an autocracy can be perilously thin, and the transition often gradual, almost imperceptible, until it is too late. That the appeal of the strongman, promising order in times of chaos, can be seductive even to those who cherish liberty. The Roman Republic did not simply vanish. Its language, its laws, its literature, its engineering, and its ideals of citizenship and public service continued to resonate through the Roman Empire it became, and indeed, echo down to our own time, shaping the foundations of Western civilization. But its death serves as a timeless, somber warning that liberty, once lost, is exceedingly difficult to regain, and that the structures designed to protect it require constant vigilance, compromise, and a commitment to the common good over personal aggrandizement. The grinding, splintering sound we heard at the beginning has ceased. In its place, for a time, under Augustus and his successors, there will be the hum of a well-ordered, if less free, empire. But the memory of the Republic, with its turbulent glories and its tragic, self-inflicted demise, will linger. A ghost in the marble halls of power, a cautionary tale whispered through the ages. The symphony of ruin is complete.